Hello, bonjour, dobry wieczór, dobry wieczór. My name is Miriam Taylor, and on behalf of the Association for Canadian Studies, Metropolis Institute, for those of you less familiar with us, it is a nonprofit research institute specializing in migration, diversity, and inclusion. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, responding to the Ukrainian refugee crisis in Canada and in Poland. While there is no direct parallel between the situations faced in the present crisis by our two host societies, we hope that through collaboration and exchange, we can identify best practices to better serve and welcome the numerous Ukrainian evacuees who have so moved the world. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on traditional land, which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. To our Ukrainian colleagues and audience, Laskava prosimo. I wish I were able to welcome you more extensively in your own language, but know that we stand in solidarity with you, that you inspire us with your incredible courage, and that we are gathered here for the purpose of better equipping ourselves to respond to the urgent needs of your fellow countrymen and countrywomen. To our Polish colleagues, jesteśmy wdzięczni naszym polskim kolegom, którzy zgodzili się poświęcić swój czas, by podzielić się z nami wiedzą i doświadczeniem tej wyjątkowo wymagającej sytuacji. Jesteśmy również szczęśliwi, że jest z nami dzisiaj Jego Ekscelencja, ambasador desygnowany Rzeczpospolitej Polski w Kanadzie, Witold Dżelski. Witamy wszystkich serdecznie. Chloe should have put the translation for that in the chat. My main mandate today is to introduce our intrepid director, president and CEO of the Association for Canadian Studies Metropolis Institute, Jack Jedwab. Jack has a long and proven track record convening researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to deliberate around the most recent and most accurate data available in order to discuss some of the most pressing issues facing our societies, both on the national and international stage. Apart from overseeing the unprecedented expansion of our institute, which has embarked on a number of groundbreaking research projects over the last years, Jack also makes time to pursue his own research interests. In the face of crisis or emergency, he launches into action while some of the rest of us are still pondering, all the while animated by a quest for universal human justice, perhaps a legacy from his parents, who were themselves Polish nationals, survivors who settled in Canada and made it their home after the Holocaust. So Jack is no stranger to the issues that we will be discussing today, or certainly his family is not. Sur ce, Jack, je te laisse la parole, ou devrais-je plutôt dire, pan Jedwab, proszę o zabranie głosu.
Merci infiniment, Myriam, et pour votre aide précieuse dans l'édification de notre programme d'aujourd'hui. I want to welcome everybody and to our program today. We surprisingly, perhaps not surprisingly, had over 500 people register for this webinar, really an unprecedented degree of interest and participation. And we're very pleased that we're here today with our colleagues from Poland to begin a discussion and conversation towards greater cooperation in the future around issues that are also fundamental to us. Canada, as you may know, is one of the world's leaders in terms of the share of immigrants in our country relative to most of the planet. And therefore, we see ourselves as having a considerable expertise, but always understand that there's a considerably greater degree of learning we need to do to better understand how to properly welcome newcomers to our country. And we're always looking to share insights and experiences with other countries. And today we have the privilege of doing so with our colleagues in Poland. And I want to begin by thanking the ambassador for joining us today. I also want to thank my team, which has done an outstanding job, led by Miriam Taylor and Agnieszka Weinar, and the people who do all the logistics, who are fantastic, James Ondrick and Chloe Nignol and Emma Prue. Thank you so much for helping put this together. It's greatly appreciated, as well as all the participants by way of speaking on the workshops and roundtables that you'll hear them sharing their perspectives and research with us shortly. I'm going to go immediately to introduce my colleague, the Honorable Senator Donna Dasco, someone I've had the privilege of knowing for at least a couple of decades. I won't, probably a bit more actually, and enjoy a really excellent friendship with. So it permits me to offer almost a personal touch in terms of my introduction of Senator Dasco, who was appointed to the Senate by Prime Minister Trudeau on June 6, 2018. She's a respected national pollster, media commentator, and private sector business leader with considerable public policy experience. Her passion for the promotion of women in politics has guided much of her advocacy. She's the co-founder and former national chair of Equal Voice, a nonpartisan organization aimed at electing more women in Canada. And she has also, well, in 2015, she co-founded the Campaign for an Equal Senate for Canada, an initiative to promote a gender equal Senate, which not only did she co-found, but she actually currently is a contributor to improving the ratio of women to men in the Senate. So, the sort of practice and advocacy got translated into actual action, and the Senate, I must say, is extremely fortunate to have my good friend Donna Dasco as a member. With that said, I do want to say one other thing, Donna. Donna and I have both had the privilege of traveling to Poland together. I know it's been over 10 years now since we did that on a mission that aimed at rediscovering our Polish identities. Some of you may be aware that the name Jedwab actually means silk, right? We call it Jedwab here, but it's silk in Polish. And there were times that I wanted to change my name to Jack Silk, actually, and my children also wanted me to make the change for purposes of making it a lot easier to spell than the challenges I've encountered here in Canada with people continuing to respell it after I've spelled them quite accurately. But I'm sure some of you also have encountered some similar types of challenges, which of course are not very significant in the scheme of things. So back to my trip to Poland with Donna, which was a very important, personal, and meaningful trip for all of us. I had the opportunity to visit my hometown of Pabianice, and it was my third visit there. It always looks different every time I go there. And hopefully I will be able to continue and intend to continue to travel to Poland in the future to engage with my colleagues in Poland. And in fact, on my most recent trip before COVID, I was there with none other than Miriam Taylor, without whom, given her fluency in Polish that I'm sure many of you have observed, I would have been lost in proverbial translation. So with all those anecdotes behind me, returning to the introduction of Senator Dasco, thank you so much, Donna, for years of friendship, which I hope will continue into the future, as will our continued collaboration on areas of mutual interest like the one we're sharing today. Merci encore infiniment pour votre amitié précieuse au fil des ans, et j'espère que nous allons continuer à bâtir notre amitié afin de poursuivre nos intérêts communs en matière de promotion des droits de la personne et la promotion de la diversité au Canada et ailleurs. So thank you, and without further ado, Senator Dasco.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. Of course, our trip to Poland over a decade ago was truly a memorable trip. We traveled to Krakow, and we also went to Auschwitz, and it was just something I will never forget to experience going to Poland and to having the opportunity to see and understand a very important part of Polish history. It is my great pleasure to open this conference today jointly with the Polish Ambassador to Canada, His Excellency, Mr. Witold Jelski, and it's wonderful to be here with him and to meet him today. I'm speaking to you today from the home of the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa, which is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. In the early morning of February 24th, almost 100 days ago, Vladimir Putin launched a brazen and unprovoked attack on Ukraine in an effort to destroy the independence of this peaceful, free, and democratic country. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg declared that we now have war in Europe. This invasion threatens the international order, it threatens the rule of law, it threatens liberty, and it threatens democracy. Millions of Ukrainians have fled their homeland as a result of these continuing attacks. According to the United Nations, 6.6 million Ukrainians have fled their country. And Poland has taken in 3.6 million of the Ukrainians who have been fleeing. To its great credit, Poland is welcoming the fleeing Ukrainians and doing the very best they can in this extremely, extremely challenging situation. And of course, Canada has also stepped up very significantly with humanitarian, military, and settlement supports for the Ukrainian people. This conference today is focusing on the efforts of 3 countries, Canada, Poland, and Ukraine, to deal with the refugee crisis. As a Canadian of both Ukrainian and Polish background, on my father's side, Ukrainian background, on my mother's side, Polish background, 5 generations on my mother's side, I am very, very proud to take on this role of opening this conference. Vitayu вас, witamy, bienvenue, and welcome. I look forward to the conference today and welcome everybody, all of the conference participants and the panelists. And it is now my pleasure to introduce the Ambassador of Poland to Canada, His Excellency, Mr. Witold Jelski. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Senator. Madam Senator Donna Dasko, Mr. Jack Jedwab, President and CEO, Association for Canadian Studies, Metropolis Institute, dear organizers, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the kind invitation to participate in this timely event. All the democracies have a tendency to give in to the so-called war fatigue. Undemocratic regimes do not have that kind of problem. Mr. Putin does not have that kind of problem. And so events as yours help us to keep the momentum, build awareness among our societies. Thank you for doing this. Chciałbym bardzo podziękować organizatorom tego wydarzenia. Naszym wspólnym zadaniem jest podtrzymywanie nie tylko naszego i światowego zaangażowania na rzecz Ukrainy. Naszym zadaniem jest też podtrzymywanie i budowanie świadomości naszych obywateli i światowej opinii publicznej w zakresie dramatu Ukraińców. Dramatu spowodowanego straszną ideologią putinowskiej Rosji. Polish institutions, NGOs, as you know, are leading the efforts to provide support to our Ukrainian sisters and brothers in all the areas. We do this in Ukraine, in Poland, and all over the world. Many of our activities would not be possible without our allies. I would like to recognize the facts that we consider Canada to be one of our best partners today. The position of your government was strong and clear from the very beginning of war. I know this well, since I had the honor to organize and participate in phone calls and meetings between my President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and many other high-level exchanges. Unfortunately, not all democratic countries are as dedicated to supporting Ukraine. We very much appreciate the work done by the Canadian politicians, experts, the media at home and in international fora. Please continue what you're doing and do more. A couple of words about the Russian aggression. In our view, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is in fact a colonial war. Ukraine did not threaten Russia, neither politically nor militarily. Russia seeks to recolonize Ukraine by imposing its language, uproot Ukrainian culture, and destroy its identity. It is our duty as members of the international community to uphold the fundamental principles of international relations violated by Moscow. On a daily basis, in a systemic manner, Russian armed forces are committing barbaric acts that bear resemblance to war crimes. Moscow has to be held accountable. After what happened in Bucha, Irpin, Kharkiv, and Mariupol, it is clear that there is no return to status quo ante in relations with Russia. Poland has been supporting Ukraine in political and military terms since the outbreak of war. We maintain an intensive bilateral dialogue. Poland has become a hub of international military and humanitarian support and is facilitating deliveries coming from other parts of the world. As the hostilities are still ongoing, in Poland, we are working on providing long-term assistance to the people fleeing Ukraine, at the same time to those in need who could not move across the border. We have already surpassed more than 3.5 million people who crossed the Ukrainian-Polish border since February 24. It is expected that another few million might come, since the number of IDPs in Ukraine is above 7.7 million people at this point. According to our estimates, the support provided in Poland will require between 4 and 8 billion euros in the period of 3 months, and between 11 and 24 billion euros by the end of this year, depending on the waves of refugees. We appeal to our allies and international partners to help us cope with the crisis. For financial aid, special accounts in cooperation with the Ukrainian side were set up in Poland by Governmental Agency for Strategic Reserve and Polish Development Bank. Funds are needed for childhood vaccination to be adopted to the Polish vaccination schedule, purchase of medicine, especially in case of chronic disease, providing psychological and psychiatric assistance, co-financing some of the flagship social programs that are also dedicated to Ukrainians, co-financing for accommodation of refugees hosted at homes of Poles, providing educational possibilities for the Ukrainian refugees at all levels. Ukrainian children and youth are admitted to Polish schools. Thanks to the special law, Ukrainian families receive access to Polish healthcare, social benefits, and labor market. Over 1 million refugees have already received a PESEL, which is the Polish social security number, thanks to which they also receive social support. These are not standard solutions. Our approach differs from the traditional mechanisms that are used for the refugees globally. The crisis is not standard, so those solutions need to be also special. As you know, over 2 decades ago, Poland got rid of the oppressive post-Soviet communist regime. Since that time, due to the hard work of Poles, we have become a developed country and are an example to countries of our region and to the countries farther east. However, as I said before, this crisis is not something that one could have expected, and it's not something one could have prepared for. And so we seek international assistance. It is our obligation to provide as much help to Ukrainians as possible. So once again, thank you for this event. Thank you for what you are doing, for what Canada is doing. Please keep up the good work and do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to the Honorable Senator Donadasco, His Excellency Mr. Witold Jelski. In your opening remarks, you really set the stage and established the framework for our event today. The disastrous Russian invasion with colonizing motivations, the superhuman effort that Poland has undertaken to welcome the refugees and respond to their most urgent needs, and the collaboration between Poland and Canada, which we will be discussing further today. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the chair of the first panel, Understanding the Views of Host Receiving Communities in Poland and Canada, Agnieszka Wajnar, who is the adjunct professor, research professor at the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. Before I pass the mic over, though, I'd just like to thank Agnieszka for the invaluable, essential role she has played in helping us organize today's event. Jack mistakenly counted her among one of our team. She has been a member of our team during this time, and we would love to collaborate further with her, but we haven't co-opted her yet. So Agnieszka, I pass the baton over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to welcome you here at this event. I wanted, before I start, I wanted to make sure that Lloyd Axworthy is ready to share his remarks at this stage. So,
Agnieszka, I understood that Mr. Axworthy was going to speak at the end of the first panel.
okay, because I had
I hope I got
yeah,
that right.
I had a different information here. I'm sorry. So then bonjour, good morning, and dobry wieczór. But also probably dzień dobry for those of the Polish who are here in Canada also listening to us, because we have to be clear that that the Poles are supporting the efforts in Ukraine, both in Poland and everywhere else where our diaspora is actually located. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional and ceded territories of the Algonquin Nation, on which the Carleton campus is located. We have now a great panel of distinguished guests who will share with us the latest research results on the topic of refugees from the war in Ukraine, both in Poland and in Canada. We have with us Professor Marta Pachocka, who is the assistant professor in the Department of Political Studies at the Warsaw School of Economics and the head of the Migration Policies Research Unit at the Center of Migration Research of the University of Warsaw. We have also with us Jonathan Scoville, who is the researcher and analyst from CBOS or TBOS, a Polish research company based in Poland. He's also a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Warsaw and at HESS in Paris. We also have with us Michael Kalin, who is the director within the Client Experience branch of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And last but not least, our last panelist is Jack Biedbab, the president of the Association for Canadian Studies and the chair of Metropolis Canada. The panel will start with the discussion of the situation in Poland. Our panelists have a lot of research results to share. So without further ado, I will invite Marta Pachocka to give us the context and the introduction to the panel.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can see my presentation and hear my voice. Agnieszka, could you please confirm that it works? Okay. So dear conference organizers, dear partners, dear speakers, guests, and obviously dear audience, and dear Agnieszka Wejnar that invited me to join this webinar. Good morning, bonjour, dzień dobry, dobroho ranku. I would like to express my gratitude to be part of this conference and of this panel. It's really a privilege. And also I see that there is a huge interest everywhere, not only in Canada, in Poland, as I can see on the basis of the colleagues listed as the event participants. So my intention today is to introduce you very briefly to the migration context of the situation in Poland, as maybe not all of you are familiar with our migration situation, our migration policy, and obviously with the very recent crisis that we are facing in the country. So I prepared many slides, but I will try to show only those that I find the most important for these introductory remarks. And Agnieszka can at any time stop me. So if there will be something of your interest, we can discuss it later after all contributions that are scheduled. So as you can see, I'm focusing on the Poland as the country response to the crisis in Ukraine through the prism of actions, actors, and challenges. So very briefly, Poland. Poland is the Central and Eastern European country. We are also the EU member states, very often called one of the new EU member states. And then we are the member of the Visegrad Group countries, including Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. On my right, you can see the map that is taken from the website of the border guards in Poland, just to understand our geopolitical situation. This is important for this speech, but also for the whole discussion and the developments that are going on in our part of Europe nowadays. So as you can see, there are 7 bordering countries in case of Poland. 4 of them are EU member states, and here all is good. But then we have 3 non-EU countries, also called third countries by the EU law. So Russia, a very short border part, Kaliningrad Oblast, Belarus, that is strongly dependent on Russia in terms of society, politics, but also economy. And then the border with Ukraine. And here I would like to emphasize that this is the longest part of our eastern border. If we take into account these 3 non-EU member states, it's more than 500 kilometers. And we have 8 land border crossing points. And it matters a lot also for the scale of the forced migration flows since late February 2022. And then obviously, as we are the EU member state, this part of our eastern border is at the same time part of the EU external border. What is our migration situation? And here I will focus only on immigration, just to give you the context. How is it? So I'm focusing on the very recent years. So you can see that only since 2016, we have a slightly positive migratory balance. So it means simply that we have more immigrants than emigrants. Also, if we look at the third countries on our eastern part of border, we can observe the phenomenon that we as migration researchers call Ukrainization of labor or economic migration to Poland. It means simply that Ukrainian citizens prevail among foreigners coming to Poland, and it started in fact in 2014. Just to remind you, this was the year of the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia. So it was also the very beginning of the crisis that we have today. So the war we have now, this invasion is not something new. This is just the most brutal part of the war that in fact was launched a few years ago. What is typical for our migration? This was mostly legal migration. It was of temporary, seasonal, and circular character. It was rather not a long-term migration, so the one aiming at settlement. Also, we were characterized by a very small influx of forced migrants, so of the people applying for international protection, for a refugee status or subsidiary protection, if we take into account the European, EU, and national law. To summarizing this migration situation context of Poland, simply we are now in the transformation from a traditional emigration country to an immigration country, and even just now with what we see, we can say that we are becoming a new immigration country. I will not discuss the Poland's migration policy because here it does not matter so much. We are more focused on what we can call integration policy, because this is what might be applied to forced migrants from Ukraine in long-term perspective, not now. So if we ask ourselves, do we have as the country national integration policy framework? I would say no, we do not have very specific integration strategy since 1989, because integration activities are part of this broad migration policy. However, there is something very tiny that we as migration researchers consider a part or the basis for the future integration policy. These are individual integration programs that are offered to the beneficiaries of international protection in the country. When I say beneficiaries of international protection, I mean the false migrants that applied for a refugee status and were granted the status or a subsidiary protection. This I will leave for later if you would be interested. And now let's move on to the topic of this Ukrainian situation. So as we can see from the data provided by the UNHCR office, from late May, the number of people that left Ukraine, left their homes, fled is over 6.8 million. That's a lot. And then obviously, if we look at the list of the main receiving countries, Poland is on the top. Here, the data from late May, it's already 3.6 million people that crossed the Polish-Ukrainian border. And here I would like to stress that this is about border crossings that we recorded. I mean here the border guard, the government, and then the UNHCR. And obviously the highest number of this crossing, of these border crossings were recorded in the first part of March, because this was the very beginning of the situation. When I'm thinking about the situation in Ukraine, I would like to use the term humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. When I'm thinking about Poland, I would like to use the term the refugee crisis in Poland, because really this is a huge number of forced migrants coming to the country. I don't want to call them refugees, because for me, refugees are those that applied for a refugee status. So it's more legal term than working term. If we look then to the second line countries, as we call them, so the countries that are not directly, that do not have direct border with Ukraine, we can see that mostly the countries that are mostly targeted or that are that have been chosen by forced migrants from Ukraine are Germany, the Czech Republic, Italy, Spain, and Bulgaria. Why these countries? Very often because of the family connections, of diaspora support, or the perception of the, let's say, level of socioeconomic development and living conditions. So this is what we know so far. I would like to stress once again that 3.6 million people, it does not reflect the number of the people that decided to stay in Poland or will stay. So we are still in this process of trying to estimate what will be the number of people fleeing Ukraine, mostly Ukrainian citizens, that will stay in Poland. Why we need this information? We need this information to design, implement, and evaluate public policies that are dedicated to these people. Here I mean obviously asylum, reception, integration policies, but also any other policies that are now open to Ukrainian citizens. So these are the data from late April from UNHCR, and these are once again only estimates based on the number of entries. So projected refugee population by the end of this calendar year in Poland might be even at the level of 4.3 million people, and then projected refugee population that may remain in the country is up to 2.6 million. Then on my right, you can see the estimates done not by an international body like UNHCR, but done by my colleagues from Center of Migration Research, two great experts in migration field in Poland, Paweł Kaczmarczyk and Maciej Duszczyk. So their estimates from late April are about 1.55, so let's say 1.6 million Ukrainian forced migrants that decided to stay in Poland. But as you can see also, the total number of Ukrainians living in Poland as of now is more or less 2.9 million. Why this? Because as you've seen earlier from my one of my very first slides, Ukrainian migration is not a new phenomenon, but it was labor migration, voluntary migration. Now this is mostly forced migration. So in total, we have around 3 million Ukrainians now in the country, but these are only estimates and the situation may change. So a very brief overview of the key actors and stakeholders on this map of providing support to Ukrainians in the very first stage of the crisis. So when I'm thinking about the stages of the crisis, I want to divide this time frame into three stages. So humanitarian response, let's say the first 2 months, then reception stage. For me, this is 1.5 years because of the law that we now have in the country. And then after 1.5 years, I would consider this process, this stage, as full integration. So Poland represents or applies, implements the open door policy for forced migrants with Ukrainian citizenship. And as I've mentioned before, is simply a primary destination country. At the very beginning, the key stakeholder were non-governmental organizations and local governments. This is very simple. These actors can act, let's say, quickly and are less formalized than, for example, a central government or international organizations. So here, these two groups of stakeholders were crucial in case of border towns. So in case of those cities or towns that were very close to Polish-Ukrainian border, like Przemyśl, but also big cities like Warsaw, our capital city, Krakow, Lublin, Wrocław, and many others. Then obviously what was already stressed by His Excellency, a huge support of average Poles, average people. So simply social support, great social solidarity, volunteers, private people, but also Ukrainian diaspora. So this was a very important stakeholder in this process of providing support. Then comes the government. So here, very quickly, we were offered legal and institutional framework to, in fact, provide support to Ukrainian forced migrants. So I'm thinking here about the new law on assistance to Ukrainian citizens in connection with the armed conflict on the territory of that country. It was approved on the 12th of March this year. And then obviously we have the whole group of international stakeholders. I'm dividing them into two groups. So coordinating bodies here, UNHCR with its regional refugee response plan. And this is also European Union. It's about sanctions, the Council directive, about this a few words in a while. And then an international organization for migration that is mostly focused on providing support to third country nationals, but also providing support in reception points. And then obviously about data collection, for example, about the population crossing the borders. So about the law I've just mentioned very briefly, the law is very new. The law is very specific, and it is dedicated to Ukrainian citizens and members of their families. This is the law that in fact provides a kind of temporary protection that is much bigger and broader than the temporary protection that is offered by the European Union legal document, the directive I mentioned from 2001. And here we should understand that temporary protection status in Poland is something else than a typical international protection status, because for us, typical IP status means a refugee status and a subsidiary protection. And this is something else than temporary protection. As the name indicates, it's about staying somewhere temporary. So it means that the country provides a legal framework for a legal stay for Ukrainian citizens for, as of now, 1.5 years, so 18 months. And the advantage of this solution is that Ukrainian citizens that cross the border as of 24th of February or later are almost granted the equal access to public services as Polish citizens. So it means that they have almost the same access to the labor market, public education, healthcare system, and many others. I will not go into details because these are very specific legal solutions. So this would be about international protection, but if you are interested, this we can discuss later. Here, a few words about what I've mentioned. So this regional refugee response plan that was offered by and is now implemented by United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. What is interesting, the plan was scheduled by mid-2022 at the very beginning, so early March. Now it was prolonged, and at least by the end of this year. So it shows that the UNHCR understands the need of its engagement and support in this part of Europe when we are facing this crisis. And it's something very new for Europe since the Second World War, even Yugoslavian war. On my right, you can see the structure of this program, of this regional plan. So it's a multi-stakeholder and multi-sector effort. So on the top, we have the UNHCR in cooperation with the government. Then we have also a very important group of non-governmental organizations. They are called as National NGO Forum. And then obviously many other specialized UN agencies, and the support under UNHCR mandate is divided into specific sectors. So we see basic needs sector, education, protection, health, and logistics. Then obviously we should remember about the support that is provided by the European Union, because we are the member of the EU member states. So very short overview what the EU did so far. So obviously we know about the package now, 6 packages of sanctions. They are against Russia and the Belarus, and they cover economic, financial, diplomatic, and political issues. Obviously, the discussions on the Ukraine's membership in the EU has accelerated, but it's not the first step of the EU-Ukraine dialogue, because in fact, there is something what we call association agreement that is in force, if I'm correct, since 2017 between the organization and Ukraine, but the war really accelerated the process. Then obviously the EU is providing on-site humanitarian support in Ukraine, and then also it provided a kind of new legal framework for those that are in need on the basis of a very specific legal tool, 2001 Temporary Protection Directive. Then on my left, you can see this EU Solidarity with Ukraine platform, where in different languages, including Ukrainian, people fleeing Ukraine can find any information that might be helpful for them. And obviously there is the financial support to the main host countries in the EU provided by this organization.
Can I ask you to slowly wrap up? Because
okay, so I
you are at time.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. That is what I asked you for. What is interesting? There are many initiatives trying to diagnose and monitor the development in main Polish cities in terms of receiving Ukrainians. So here it's, for example, the report by the Union of Polish Metropolises covering 12 big cities. So if you are interested, I can post the link to it. And then what is really of our interest as researchers, not policymakers, is a long list of questions regarding how to manage the refugee crisis or the humanitarian crisis in both countries, how to respond. So what is the population, what is the social, economic and demographic profile of the people that are in need of temporary protection, what are their needs, but also how to prepare our public services, not only now, but also in mid and long term. So how to address the needs and expectations of the people in need, taking into account our infrastructure, money, people, and capacities. And finally, also, what is our, as the country, aim? Do we want to provide midterm reception or long-term integration? And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. That was very, very informative, and I think that it gave a very good introduction to the next presentation by Jonathan Scoville, who will talk to us about the attitudes of the Polish citizens towards the Ukrainian refugees. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you. So good morning, bonjour, dzień dobry. I'll just share my presentation. Is it visible?
Yes.
It's okay. Okay. So I'll present data collected by my institute, Center for Public Opinion Research, CEBOS, regarding Polish attitudes towards Ukrainian refugees. And since the beginning of the war, we conducted 3 surveys surveys concerning Ukrainian refugees on the samples of around 1,000 Polish respondents each. I'll start with the data regarding the perceived presence of Ukrainians in our country. So in the beginning of April, 75% of Poles declared that there were some people in their area who came from Ukraine fleeing the war. So we see that it was a really common experience. 1 in 3 Poles knew someone fleeing the war in Ukraine personally. In both cases, such declarations were more common in the largest cities of Poland. And now we can move to the general attitude of Poles towards the refugees coming from Ukraine. The vast majority, almost 90% of Poles, believes that the refugees from Ukraine should be accepted by the Polish state. The small percentage of respondents who are against it are often the ones who might think that the influx of migrants from Ukraine can affect their own material situation. So these are the unemployed, for example, the pensioners, but also unskilled workers and service workers for whom Ukrainian migrants can potentially constitute a competition. It is also worth noting that it's the youngest people who are overrepresented in this small group of Poles who are against admitting the Ukrainian refugees too. So on this next chart, we can see how the level of acceptance towards the Ukrainian refugees in Poland was changing during the last years. Actually, we started asking this question in 2015 during the European migrant crisis, because back then Polish attitudes towards the refugees coming from the Middle East and Africa were exceptionally negative. So we wanted to check if these attitudes will be equally negative towards refugees coming from a culturally proximate country. So as we expected, the attitudes towards Ukrainian refugees were much more positive, but they were never close to the level they are reaching now. Actually, when we first asked this question in August 2015, it was 50% of Polish people who were supporting the acceptance of Ukrainian refugees. And right after the outbreak of the war, this percentage increased to 94%. It's worth noting that this percentage is slowly decreasing now, but it's still close to 90%. So as we can see on this slide, according to the declarations of respondents, Polish attitudes towards the Ukrainian refugees that are already in Poland are also largely positive. And the next part of our questions referred to the ways in which Poles were helping Ukrainian refugees in practice. So when we asked our respondents in the beginning of April if they or people from their households were helping Ukrainian refugees in a voluntary and unpaid way, 63% of them answered in the affirmative. 1 month later, this percentage was significantly lower, but it's still a majority, 54%. affirmative answers were more common among women than men, but also among people who are engaged in religious practices, who are interested in politics, who have a higher education, and who live in the biggest cities. As it comes to yes, on this slide, we see that the percentage of Poles declaring that they help Ukrainians doesn't vary too much by the region of Poland, though it is the highest in the Mazovian voivodeship, where our capital is located. And in the April
I
survey,
need the money. What do you?
excuse me? Okay. So on this slide, we can see next question. We asked the respondents who declared helping Ukrainian refugees, in what ways exactly they do that. And as we see, the most popular forms of help were donating items like food, clothing, or hygiene items, or donating money. 8% of respondents declared providing an apartment and accommodation for the Ukrainian refugees, which constitutes 5% of the whole Polish population. A stable majority of Polish people believes that the assistance that Poland offers to Ukrainian refugees is sufficient. It didn't change really. And people who believe that this assistance is too small are more common among respondents with left-wing views, the residents of the largest cities, and also among the people who are helping Ukrainian refugees themselves. And on the other hand, people who believe that the assistance of Poland towards Ukrainian refugees is too big are more common among, again, the youngest respondents between the age of 18 and 24, the respondents in a bad economic situation, and also the respondents who aren't helping Ukrainian refugees themselves. Finally, we asked Poles how they rate the actions of various Polish institutions and groups towards refugees from Ukraine. And as we see, 96% of respondents rated positively the actions of ordinary people. Next in order were the NGOs with 85% of positive rates. Then we have local governments with 83%, Polish state with 79%, and the church with 55%. As we can see on this last slide, the evaluations of the Polish state actions towards refugees from Ukraine were highly dependent on political sympathies of respondents. So as we can see, almost all supporters of the ruling party rated it positively. So these are all of the main results of our surveys that I wanted to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was very interesting. I think that now we can fully appreciate what this migration actually did to the social tissue, in a way, of Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Michael Kalin. who will talk to us about the Canadian approach to the situation of refugees in Poland. I would only ask Jonathan to stop sharing his screen. Michael, are you there?
I am, yes. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
Yes?
Oh, now
Okay,
I see
great,
you.
great.
You see.
Hi, greetings. Hi. Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. J'ai le plaisir d'être ici. Mes paroles seront en anglais pour la plupart à propos de notre sondage sur les intentions des clients ukrainiens liés avec le programme à beaucoup. Cela dit, n'hésitez pas à poser des questions dans la langue de votre choix. I'll speak in English for the remainder of my presentation, but just to note that please feel free to use either French or English as you wish. So I'm going to be speaking in my capacity as the director of a team helping to spearhead the Government of Canada's Immigration Department's efforts to conduct empirical research on our clients to generate data-driven insights for decision-making and to better ensure that the services that we deliver are actually client-centric. And by that, I mean based on client needs as they are, not as we often assume them to be. So like I said, I work in a branch within the operations sector called the Client Experience Branch. And really the entirety of our efforts is about, of my division, is to ensure that the needs of our clients are integrated in the service delivery process. And in so doing, to make our work and our delivery more client-centric. So my remarks today will largely be geared towards giving you all a sense of IRCC's information collection priorities vis-a-vis our clients. So there's a bit of an irony here. I'm talking to you about how we think about our clients as opposed to how we think about the host community per se. But I'll flag a couple general tools that we use in my division and then focus the rest of my presentation on a particular survey that we ran on clients from Ukraine. So I'll just say first that our efforts to essentially become client-centric in this respect is accomplished in a couple different ways. So first of all, what I'm going to be speaking about mostly is how we use our application inventory for real-time surveys of our client population. And we do this to generate, as I mentioned, data-driven insights to assist in decision-making and operation planning and communications. We also have a virtual usability space where we actually test our products and services, our forms, all those kinds of things with clients virtually located all over the world. We actually compensate them for this. And we do this to catch problems in our products before we actually release them. And the third thing that we do is, like our quantitative service, we also have a group that does deep qualitative interviews and focus groups to understand the pain points that our clients experience, their needs, and ideally to even identify possible solutions to it. So all of this is really an effort to gain precision in terms of the kinds of clients that we have. We want to understand them and their behaviors, which we want to predict. Precision in terms of the specific stages of the journey that they are in and the kinds of needs that they have at those stages. And precision as the kinds of questions that is of interest to our stakeholders, who can take those kinds of insights and integrate them into service delivery, for example, into settlement service provision and the policymaking cycle in general, so that we can improve outcomes for our clients in real time. So just a bit of context here. Canada is currently offering a special visa to support the people of Ukraine. It offers them, among many things, but this visa offers them and their family members free extended temporary status to come to work, study, and stay in Canada until it is safe to return home. And so we have, it's called the CU-AET, this special visa. In mid-April, we had around just under 25,000 approved applicants for this visa. And at that time, in mid-April, we actually ran a survey of the client inventory, essentially inviting them to participate in a voluntary survey to better understand their intentions and their expectations and their needs. And so this survey is what I'm going to be speaking to for the remainder of my intervention. I'll just say I don't have a PDF or a PowerPoint to brief today. I'll be using it'll be verbal, but we are working very hard to share this information actively and release this information to stakeholders as well as the public. So stay tuned. We really do appreciate your patience. We are working very hard to make this accessible to all. So I'll just say that, as I mentioned, this survey was fielded it began on April 14th. It was available in English and French, in Ukrainian, as well as Russian. We had over 10,000 responses from our clients. That was a response rate of around 40% at the time, so very, very good. Just to note that 60% about of our respondents were female, just under 40% were male, 70% were aged 18 to 39, so fairly young. And the majority of our respondents were actually in the European Union at the time of the survey. So I think I'll start with, I want to give you all essentially 5 key insights that we derived from our survey. And some of them I think are fairly intuitive, but it's important to have empirical evidence backing up your intuitions. And then I'm going to give you some caveats as well as how we think about this in our department as we're interpreting this. So I think the first key insight is really that almost all of the respondents we talked to intend to come to Canada, and the majority intend to arrive quickly within the next 6 months. Now, that's encouraging in many respects, although there are some caveats here, because I think we see this as a very high for as far as the next 6 months. Those findings are obviously based on people who indeed responded to our survey. There are many people who don't, and distinguishing between, what is it about people who end up taking a survey from the government of Canada? Do they have qualities or aspects, motivations that may differ from the general population is an open question. So it's difficult for us to generalize in this respect. Also, I mean, there is survey social desirability bias. As a government institution, it's often difficult to necessarily convey to clients the reality that we have their responses will not influence how we process their application. And so clients sometimes feel that implicitly there is an effort to respond in certain ways that we think is desirable, even though it has no implications for our decision making. So in some ways, we think this is an upper bound. I think one of the questions in the QA asked for presentation. As I mentioned, I don't have a presentation with me. This is a verbal briefing today, but my organization is working very hard to release this proactively to the public and to stakeholders as well. The second insight I wanted to tell you is that, and fairly intuitive again, that uncertainty about the situation in Ukraine is really the top driver for those who are making decisions to come to Canada under this visa. Over half talk about the situation in Ukraine, specifically the war, obviously, and martial law policies as highly influential, driving the decision making. One implication is that respondents' intentions to come might change if that situation stabilizes in some ways. So indeed, if stability is increased, they may reconsider their decision to come and their timeline as well for doing so. But of course, others do indicate reasons for coming to Canada for other pull factors, such as the opportunity to obtain more career opportunities, opportunities for study, quality of living, or other aspects of their attitudes that are shaped favorably towards Canada, such as multiculturalism and these kinds of factors. Other factors that we think about, especially as we plan special measures to support our clients. Some of the information we're seeing include things like various prerequisites for coming to Canada, such as successful visa approval for other family members, the ability to make travel arrangements, just having flight availabilities, which is partly why our department is now engaging in chartering flights, as well as concerns and hesitation regarding martial law in Ukraine, which would enable adult-age men to leave Ukraine legally. The third insight I'm going to share from this survey is that just under half of our respondents indicate that they plan to stay for 3 or more years. So among our respondents, the vast majority, almost 90%, actually intend to apply for permanent residency in Canada. Again, we need to be careful in our interpretations of these kinds of intentions, but I think we have fair confidence that there is significant interest among those who do come to actually remain in Canada as permanent residents. And it's an opportunity for immigration as opposed to just a temporary stay. very quickly, noting time, just to say that we saw a lot of variation in intended province of settlement. Top provinces include the province of Ontario, and then Alberta and British Columbia. I would just note Ontario and British Columbia typical of our clients in many respects, given the size of the major cities, Vancouver and Toronto. Alberta is interesting, partly, and I think for many of those on the call, aware of the important locations of Ukrainian Canadian communities historically. So there are all kinds of transnational factors that I think speak to why cities in Alberta, as well as Manitoba and Saskatchewan, are high on this list as well. Then finally, the fifth insight is really just about the kinds of settlement support that clients are saying that they need, which is helping to inform some of our engagement with our stakeholders, particularly service provider organizations. The vast majority of our clients indicate they intend to work in Canada. Over half intend to apply for a study permit. These findings point to a need for support in finding employment opportunities, as well as validating previous work and educational requirements. So I'll just say in sum, the majority of clients in this survey indicate they're hoping to relocate to Canada with family members for the long term due to uncertain situations of the security situation in Ukraine. Their settlement destinations are varied beyond just what we often see in this context, which is the major metropolis. So settlement in Alberta, in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan, in addition to Quebec, Ontario, and in British Columbia. Of course, we, as I mentioned before, limitations in drawing too strong conclusions from such survey information, given certain social desirability biases and aspects of the limitations of our sample, which was not a random sample of our client pool, but all the same, I think, a step towards generating real-time data-driven insights for our department and also for our stakeholders. So I'll end there, and I just thank you very much. Happy to connect offline as well and discuss further as needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But that was a very interesting insight into what immigration to Canada means for the Ukrainian refugees. Now I wanted to turn to our last panelist, to Jack, who will tell us what is the Canadian opinion on that immigration prospect. Thank you and welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Agnieszka. And I'm going to cut right to the chase and present the data from a survey that we commissioned with a firm called Léger Marketing, which is a national firm in Canada that's a highly respected firm and has been doing work with us for approximately 20 years now. So just a quick review of the methodology for the survey, which was conducted between May 6th and 8th with 1,534 Canadians. It's a web panel, so these types of surveys don't have margins of error, even though we offer comparative margins of error based on similar random surveys that are done by telephone. So you can see what that might look like. Basically, what the survey tells us is the vast majority of Canadians, as you see here, have a positive view of Ukrainian refugees. About 90% express this positive sentiment towards Ukrainian refugees. I would argue that that percentage is probably a record for any positive view of refugees at any time in Canada's history, though I don't have all the comparative data to demonstrate that, but the level is exceptionally high. Given, however, that there's a 4-point scale in this survey, we, in terms of, as you'll note in the next few slides, will attempt to unpack some of this survey by looking at across that 4-point spectrum, from the sort of very positive to the somewhat positive, somewhat negative, very negative. Look at how each of those groups view particular issues related to the settlement and integration of Ukrainian refugees. How many refugees do you think Canada should accept? Well, the numbers that Canadians think we should accept actually are below the numbers we're intending to receive. The largest plurality view the admission level at that they think we should pursue as above 50,000, so 31%. But but there are percentages of Canadians, as you can see, in particular with the less than 10,000 group, 1 out of 5 would opt for less than 10,000 while still holding a positive view of refugees. But a lot of that speaks to Canadians' uncertainty about the numbers of refugees we admit generally and or the numbers of immigrants we admit generally. And so very often when we ask questions like that, we have to bear in mind that the numbers themselves aren't things that Canadians are sufficiently familiar with, despite the fact that we are a country that is very engaged in immigration with a high percentage of immigrants in the country generally. Now, when asked whether Canadians feel that Ukrainian refugees remain in Canada over the longer term, what we see here is that most of the population believe Ukrainians will remain in the country over that longer term at 60%, while 40% think that Ukrainian refugees will return to the Ukraine when the war ends. So we'll learn a little bit more of that as we unpack that data a bit further in the slides ahead. Would one allow a refugee from Ukraine to live in their home on a temporary basis? 46% of Canadians say they would be willing to do so. I think in that question, we need to distinguish a bit between the totally agree and somewhat agree. So the totally agree that they would allow refugees from Ukraine to live in their home on a temporary basis, 16%, as opposed to somewhat agree. I think, as Michael suggested, in terms of social desirability, on questions like that, we do see the social desirability element kick in. So my sense is that you probably wouldn't see 46% of Canadians in allowing refugees from Ukraine to live in their home on a temporary basis. Were that to be the case, we would probably be able to solve one of the major issues that Ukrainian and other refugees are encountering in Canada, which is the housing crisis that you'll probably hear about in the roundtable following this workshop. So allowing refugees from Ukraine to live in one's home on a temporary basis, well, here we see by region of Canada what that looks like, and we can see that Albertans are most likely to strongly agree with the acceptance of a refugee from Ukraine living in their homes at 22.7%. That's, and again, the focus on the strong agreement as opposed to the overall agreement. Now we go a bit, let's see, go to the next slide. Here's a very key question in terms of the perception as to whether there's a moral obligation on the part of Canadians to offer asylum to Ukrainian refugees. And there you can see 3 in 4 Canadians feel that way. If we're going to, again, divide it up between the strongly agree and somewhat agree, 31% strongly agree, 42% somewhat agree. So there's, again, when you sort of look at it on that 4-point scale, you can see where there's a bit of a softer sentiment if you want to divide it up that particular way. And what we'll try to do when we develop the results here further is to look at each of those groups, the strongly agrees, the somewhat agree, the somewhat disagree, and strong disagree, to better understand what their thinking is with respect to some of the issues that we've been looking at here. So here we look at the numbers issue and do the sort of cross tabulation with whether Canadians feel that Ukrainian refugees will remain in Canada for the long term or whether they'll return home. And what we see is that the numbers don't really have much bearing on the extent to which people think that the refugees should stay in Canada over the long term. So again, it's not by virtue of one thinking there'll be more or less that it has any bearing on that has any bearing on the issue of length of stay. So length of stay doesn't seem to be or perception around length of stay doesn't seem to be a major mitigating factor in the numbers that Canadians think we should admit from Ukraine. Similarly here, the willingness to allow refugees to live in one's home also temporarily, also there appears to be little impact in terms of the willingness to do so and whether people think Ukrainians will stay in Canada over the longer term or over a shorter period of time. Both of those are, I think, key indicators in terms of, again, the perception Canadians have about the situation of Ukrainian refugees and what types of supports Canadians are willing to provide. Now, keep in mind, these are perceptions Canadians have, and they're open to change. There's a social desirability effect here. But clearly, you know, in general, the issue around whether people perceive Ukrainians to stay shorter or longer isn't something that has an effect on their willingness to admit them in their homes, or as said earlier, on the numbers that should be admitted. Canada has a moral obligation to offer asylum to Ukrainian refugees fleeing from the Russian invasion. Well, in this case, what we're trying to look at is the extent to which people are willing to do so on the basis of a regional distribution. And again, British Columbians seem most likely to think we have a moral obligation, but there are high percentages across the country that feel similarly. And the moral obligation issue, as you can see in this slide, is a major predictor, probably the key predictor of the willingness to offer thicker types of supports to Ukrainian refugees. By thicker in this case, I refer to the issue of allowing a Ukrainian refugee to live in one's home on a temporary basis. If you feel that we have a moral obligation, if you strongly feel we have a moral obligation to admit the Ukrainian refugees, then you're far more likely to totally agree that Ukrainian refugees should be admitted on a temporary basis to the homes of Canadians. Sorry. Next. So the more one feels that Canada has a moral obligation to admit Ukrainian refugees, the more they're open to welcoming increasing numbers. So again, here what we see is that the idea that we have a moral obligation is a very, very significant predictor of the extent to which we're willing to admit Ukrainian refugees, or the numbers of Ukrainian refugees to Canada. So all that to say, in terms of lessons to be extracted from the survey results, the more we instill the idea that we have a moral obligation in this regard, the thicker and more committed Canadians are providing support for Ukrainian refugees. Again, the more one feels that Canada has a moral obligation to admit Ukrainian refugees, the more likely to have a positive opinion of the refugees. Again, here on that scale, you see that 73.1%. Canada has a moral obligation to offer asylum to Ukrainian refugees. The more you feel that we have a moral obligation, the more you're likely to have that highly positive view of Ukrainian refugees. And just in closing, I thought some of my Polish colleagues might be interested to learn that Canada has, at least in this last survey we did, a very positive view of Poland. In fact, this is unprecedented. I've never in 30 years of seeing this type of survey result, seen Canada rank Poland #1, tied with Australia, in terms of its positive rating when asked which countries Canada has a favorable view of. And again, you can see that Russia on the bottom doesn't fare particularly well, unsurprisingly, in terms of such a ranking. But why is it? And that's why I thought this was particularly relevant in terms of our conversation, even though it may seem as though it's a last slide throw-in to share some positive news with my colleagues in Poland. But why do Canadians have such a positive view of Poland, suddenly? And it's largely due to Poland's admission, I would argue, of Ukrainian refugees, because as you can see here, the more you have a positive view of Poland, the more you have by far a positive view of Ukrainian refugees. So there's something to be said about, at least from a Canadian perspective, how we view other countries in terms of the way we see their treatment of refugees. So a good indicator in terms of issues around diplomacy and how certain types of behaviors contribute to altering our perceptions when it comes to rating the positive or negative features of certain countries, with Poland shooting to the top, largely by virtue of how it's perceived to be admitting Ukrainian refugees. So I'll stop at this point and hope I haven't gone over time. And there's going to be more data to share because we intend to continue to do polling in this area. And we also are doing some polling on Afghan refugees as well. And we will be, although we were going to announce this at the end, on June 20th, holding another webinar on the challenges encountered by Afghan refugees. June 20th is the World Refugee Day, and so we'll be marking that day with another webinar on Afghan refugees, and similarly looking at what the data tells us and looking at some of the challenges they're encountering. And Agnieszka, let me also say very quickly that there was some talk about some of our settlement organizations, some researchers taking an opportunity to going on the ground and visiting with our colleagues in Poland to share knowledge and insights. And I'm still hoping, that we'll be able to do that at some point in the not too distant future, and meet and discuss face-to-face some of the issues and share insights and expertise with our colleagues.
Thank you, Jack. that this would be really valuable input, I would think, of the Canadian experience sharing, I would say. At this point, I would like to invite all the panelists to open their cameras because we still have time for a question or two. And I wanted to abuse a little bit my position as a moderator, and to Jonathan, Michael, Martha, and Jack. I have a question. I wanted to ask you about two groups we didn't really talk about that have been actually impacted by the war in Ukraine. And one of the groups, I saw the questions in the Q&A, and that was tackled. So what do you know about the numbers, the situation first of unaccompanied minors in these flows from Ukraine? Do we have a lot of children alone? What happens with them? What are the policy solutions in Canada and also in other European countries to maybe take care of them? And what are the attitudes of the Polish society? And then another group that we didn't really talk about is people who are non-Ukrainian citizens, but who also escaped the war. And we know that they managed to cross to Poland. I would like to know more about them and the situation that they are facing. So I don't know who would like to answer any of these questions. Yes, Marta?
Agnieszka, thank you for the question, but I will be very brief because I don't have in my hands like very precise numbers, for example, because this I have to check as every day I'm doing with the data. But very briefly, you asked about two issues. So third country nationals that are non-Ukrainian citizens and the situation, and then the minors. So as far as I know, obviously during the first weeks of the crisis, humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, in Poland, we were receiving many other third country nationals. Obviously, in comparison to the total of Ukrainian forced migrants, this would be for sure less than 10%, but I'm not sure, I have to check. But in general, they were all the people that wanted to cross Polish-Ukrainian border, they were allowed to cross this border, even if they were male, because one comment that should be made here, according to the Ukrainian law, male aged 18 to 60 years, they cannot leave the country. So in case of male migrants of other nationalities, it was not the issue, and usually they were allowed to stay in Poland, these third country nationals, up to 15 days. I can give you an example of what we did at my Warsaw School of Economics, so one of my universities. So simply, as we have a strong cooperation, academic cooperation with African countries, and even we have the plenipotentiary for cooperation with African universities, we received the very first week many African students from Ukraine, students of technical faculties, IT faculties, and so on. And simply we connected them to their embassies, and the return flights were organized. Then obviously the IOM also got involved in this, so it was managed. In terms of minors and in general the situation of third country nationals, here an important role is played by UNHCR. So as I've mentioned, there are different subsection thematic groups. So there are the people specializing in these issues, also taking care of minors, and also, if I'm correct, the new law that we have on Ukrainian forced migrants provides specific solutions to Ukrainian minors. And then obviously we have our social policy. So simply the same rules of protection within the welfare state are applied to minors of any nationality that are in Poland. But that's true that the first weeks were hard. It was a bit, you know, how to say, complex, not to say messy, but it was complex. But now the procedures are in. I'm not very sure about the scale of the phenomenon of minors from Ukraine, but there is this problem, unfortunately, that some families, for example, were even separated during the, you know, crossing the borders.
Thank you, Marta. Does anyone else want to talk or speak to these topics? If not, then I know that there is at least, I don't know, Michael, you want to add something? Yes, please.
I can only add based on the information that we have that might be of interest here. So I'll be quick and within constrained because there are certain limitations. I think someone from the audience had asked a question about unaccompanied minors. Our survey that we ran, well, because of the way that we collect data in our department, we don't actually know if they're unaccompanied or not. We do know that out of 10,000 people who responded to our survey, under 100 were under the age of 17. That's as far as I can go into detail on that particular question. On the other question about possible clients from third countries who would be interested in, let's say, coming to Canada through this visa, this UAET visa. We didn't ask that question directly. We did probe questions on, we didn't ask, for example, about ethnic or racial identity. We had some proxy measures about language spoken, and we were interested also in understanding possible discrimination that clients might have experienced during the process of coming to Canada. The incident rate that we saw was very low. It was less than 1%. Again, be very careful in interpreting this data, but that's what I can share, at least for the audience, for anyone of interest.
Thank you so much. We are almost at time, so I wanted to see if there is anyone else who would like to ask the question. Magdalena Boyna, I don't know if you would like to ask a question.
No, welcome everyone. I'm from the Polish Metropolises Union from Poland, and I would like to answer for your question about children, because we have some data about it, but they are not complex, because we know officially that almost 400 child has a Polish ID number, but we know also that only 3% Ukrainian applied for this ID number. So this is not complex number of children in Poland. And we know also that most of them learn online in a Ukrainian system of education, not at Polish school, not at our system. So we suppose that most of people who came to Poland, it was 3,700,000 person. This is the new information from yesterday. Sorry, so that's mean that most of them are children. So we don't know exactly how many are there, and we suppose that maybe on September, when New Year at school will start, we will have more information about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to invite Naomi Alboim to ask the last question, because I see that she also wanted to ask one.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just really struck, Michael, by the survey results of the people that had applied for the emergency travel authorization, where the vast majority of them are indicating they intend to apply for permanent residency and see themselves staying in Canada. I assume that's not a surprise, in the sense that people who are choosing to cross the Atlantic Ocean rather than staying in the EU despite the fact that their husbands and fathers and sons are still in Ukraine, have an intention to actually stay in Canada. So given that, and given the results of your survey, I'm wondering whether there is reconsideration being given, number one, to their ineligibility for WRAP services like income support and accommodation, and whether there is reconsideration being given to the no limit to the number of entries to Canada. We know from the Kosovo example, for example, that only 30% of people that came to Canada actually returned to Kosovo. Most of them remained here on a permanent basis, even though that was also considered an emergency temporary evacuation and the intention that people would go home. They didn't go home. My assumption is that many of the Ukrainians coming here won't go home. So why not make it possible for them to be integrated more quickly with the full supports and services that other refugees get? And permanent residency.
Chair, should I address this point directly or? Okay. Nomi, thank you for that question and the intervention. Maybe I'll just interject a small nuance in the data just to assist in a bit of the interpretation, because I don't want to go beyond that for the purposes of this discussion, although I think you raised very important points. To say, though, that we actually surveyed clients at where they were at the time of answering the survey. 63% were still within the European Union when they gave us this information. Only 6% were actually in Canada. So just in terms of the interpretation, I would just say the vast majority of the clients who indicated these results to us had yet to actually reach Canada. So we were talking about their intentions, their plans, and I just wanted to get just to clarify that one point. I'll say the other point I'll mention, though, is this is, I think, interesting data that's been very important in the discussion. There is a bit of, haze. I think the fog of war applies to this as well. And so I think we're internally weighing data like this with other bits of information, often quite anecdotal, with other kinds of suggestions. So I don't think there's a clarity here or a consensus yet. And I think we're trying to research this more actively for the very reasons you mentioned. So I want to thank you for that. That's very important insights, and it's impelling us further in our research agenda.
Agnieszka, let me jump in on that as well, because in terms of our own survey work, we actually interchangeably use the term refugees in most of the questions. We sometimes didn't use the term refugees, use the term asylum seekers, and sometimes just use the term Ukrainians. I think most Canadians understand the Ukrainians coming here to be refugees, but it's something we're going to probe in our next survey, which we're going to do next week, in terms of how Canadians understand the term refugees and what types of assistance should be provided to the Ukrainians in this case, irregardless of how they're being classified. But it's been the object of a lot of debate, which there's been some public attention, directed debate, but quite minimally. It's a debate that we hear more in policy circles and amongst other experts, but clearly, it's something we need to air out more, and I presume we'll hear more about this in the next session.
Thank you, Jack, for this clarification. I wanted maybe to reflect a little bit, on the other side of the spectrum, we have, of course, Ukrainian state that is fighting for survival. And one element in the presentation of Marta actually struck me, the idea of the main danger as it is defined by that state. This is the terrain that they are hearing, right? So we have to walk here a very fine line, I would say. It's a very dangerous moment. We still don't know where the war will go and how long it will go on for. So I absolutely appreciate no haste in that direction. Marta, you would like to add on this, maybe?
Very brief comment, because also I'm following the questions that are going on the chat. So in case of Poland, the people that I consider forced migrants with Ukrainian citizenship, they can apply for a refugee status. So they can go through a typical asylum procedure and so on and so on. But this procedure goes with other legal framework, with the law on protection, where the procedure takes much longer and is really rooted in the UN Geneva Convention 51. So simply it takes time and it's analyzed case by case. But while the temporary protection status, it does not mean that we do not want, as the country within our national legal framework, to offer these people a refugee status. They can choose. So automatically, if they meet the criteria stipulated in the law from March 2022, they have automatically legal status. They can stay legally in the country. They do not have to apply for anything. So even they do not need any official paper. They can apply for PESEL, so the special, let's say, social security number that we have in Poland, just to make their life easier. But if they decide to use temporary protection status, they do not apply for a refugee status. So because both are forms of international protection, but with other logic behind. Temporary means that we try to provide them with the support here for this, let's say, medium term, with the option that maybe they would like to return. And we see already that the number of people that are returning, crossing the border, is increasing. Obviously, we don't know for how long. So maybe this is only for a few days to see what is the situation and so on. So that's really, there are many unknowns, and we should keep this in mind. And the brain drain, this we see in case of the cooperation of the universities. So now there is a full dialogue between the ministries of higher education. There are programs and grants and scholarship solutions, not to take the people, students, PhD candidates and professors, but just to support them. But as you said, we don't know if there will be place and space to get back. I mean, even so simple thing like technical infrastructure, like the buildings. That's it.
Thank you, Marta. I'm very sorry we are out of time. I give floor to Jack now, but I would like to thank all the panelists for the fantastic panel filled with information. Please, Jack.
So thank you very much. That was very enriching, and there was a lot of questions I noticed, and I'm hoping that some of the answers will be provided in the next session where we'll have an opportunity to further elaborate on some of the things that have been said at this point. Alors, sois assuré que lors de la prochaine séance, il va y avoir des réponses, si on peut, qui soient fournis à des questions qui étaient posées à la discussion très riche. So I'm going to introduce our closing speaker for this session. He was hoping to be the closing speaker for the forum, but something imprévu, something unpredicted has arisen. So we have the privilege, nonetheless, of getting the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy to provide us with some observations and comments. Mr. Axworthy is the chair of the World Refugee Council and one of Canada's leading voices on global migration and refugee protection. After a 27-year political career, where he served as Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Employment and Immigration, amongst other postings, Mr. Axworthy has continued to work extensively on human security, refugee protection, and human rights in Canada and abroad. So without further ado, I introduce and invite Lloyd Axworthy to make some comments for us. Thank you, Mr. Axworthy.
Well, thank you, Jack. And let me, at the outset, say I've been really quite taken with the presentations. I think the information and the analysis has been really very, very germane and very relevant to some of the big questions that are really arising these days over the question of migration and displacement, and because beginning with the fact that Poland has almost become an exemplary demonstration of how you basically erase the border and make sure that people who are coming in as guests, as newcomers, are given virtually the same kind of condition support, education, income, so health, as well as certain kinds of rights. And I think that happens at a very important time in the broad scheme of things, because so many other countries are basically providing more restrictions, less openness, cutting back on support systems. The UN conclusion right now is that we're heading into a very major surge of people. Last count was 80 million displaced. They're now talking that in the next 3 years, it could be as high as 100 million. That's a vast movement of people. And I think what we're seeing is the microcosm of the Ukraine movement into Poland and other parts of Europe, and to a lesser extent in North America. It really raises some of the key questions about how you do it. And I think the questions that came up during the period about isn't it time that we began to really consider that this is not a temporary movement? This is a more permanent movement. The survey results that Jack showed clearly demonstrate that this is not something that can be said as a turnaround and people will go back. First, because it increasingly is more difficult to go back because the war continues. The destruction in Ukraine has multiplied, and the ability to finance and provide resources for a return or for a rebuilding is very scant. And that's one thing I want to point about. In the work we're doing at the WRMC, if there's a real flaw in the present day system, it's money. UNHCR holds pledging conferences in which you get maybe 30% of what's being asked for. Even those pledges are often not delivered, which means that in all kinds of refugee concentrations around the world, that people who are under the jurisdiction of the United Nations are still going hungry, are not getting health care, and are not establishing sort of any ability to take root and find some kind of anchorage in their lives. We have a network of women who are around the world who are refugees, which they use the platform to talk about their issues every couple of months. And what keeps coming through is the comment of one of the made who said, it's not a matter that we're the last in the queue, we're not even in the queue anymore. They're basically being ignored. And I think that's one of the significant issues, is that the effort to respond to the large movement of people from Ukraine into Europe and to Poland in particular is something that really sets up in the minds of a lot of people from the other parts of the world who are refugees or displaced, that there is two standards, two tracks. And I think that's one of the issues I think that governments who are involved, including our own in Canada, has to come to grips with that program. And rather than sort of putting it just as it's an either or, I think we have to say that what's happening in Poland and the examples they're setting should be a standard that's being applied to other refugee movements as well. That leads me to a couple of very specific comments. One, I think the idea that we can continue to use a temporary visa program for the resettlement of refugees in Canada, in this case Ukrainians, has to be pretty quickly revised. I'm perplexed, for example, why the sponsorship program is not being activated. When I was Minister of Immigration, during the major movement out of Vietnam, the boat people, 60% of the settlement of people in Canada came through sponsorship, private sponsorship. The churches and the NGO groups and the business groups who all got together. At this point in time, the private sponsorship has really been kind of almost a forgotten element of the Immigration Act. And I think it's, Jack, part of the discussion I hope will take place in the next panel as to why and how does that change, because I think it is an example of how other countries could begin to use a sponsorship formula to also provide for a broader base of settlement. When we issued a report about the state of refugee issues in the world a couple of years ago, we said one of the key problems is how do you share responsibility? You can't simply rely on border countries, host countries. In the case of Africa, many of them are some amongst the poorest countries who are accepting people coming in from Mali, or from Somalia, from Ethiopia, and other places. In Europe, I think there will be a point at which point the Polish system can't absorb much more, and particularly if people begin becoming a more permanent settlement, there will have to be a large yes. Now, how does that happen? Well, here's an idea you may want to debate or think about. One of the issues that we've been promoting, and which the Canadian government has now adopted as part of its budget papers, is that the large amount of assets that have been frozen as a result of the sanctions being applied, that rather than sitting frozen in bank accounts, that those assets should be repurposed and redirected to provide direct support for those who have been victimized by the actions of the Russians or the Ethiopian government or what's happening in Haiti. And that money really goes back in. We're talking about billions of dollars that are now being held and now have to be redirected to support and enable those who have been mostly deeply affected by the conflict or the major political persecutions that are going on. So I think it is a time to begin looking at what's happened and deciding what are the next steps. So it's not a matter of just tinkering a little bit or massaging existing programs or systems. I think the evidence and affirms what I think is a strong imperative that we begin to rethink the system. And that's going to take not just a wish, it's going to take a fairly broad network of interested governments and NGOs and international institutions to come together for a major question about how do we manage the incredible moves that are coming because of the conflicts, because of the corruption, because of the persecution, because of climate, so that we are actually enabling, or are we simply looking forward to a time when we've got over 100 million and growing people who are totally unconnected, unrooted, and living in the most dire of situations. So I really think that what I keep hearing is that the issue in Ukraine has generated a lot of serious issues about the larger system that we're working under. And fortunately, I think the response of Poland has given some light, some beacon about how you may start to handle these kinds of issues. And I think the corollary of that, if I might say so, is not just the issue of non-Ukrainians who cross the border into Poland. I think for a country like ours in Canada, the issue is we are applying the same kind of standards and norms and procedures for those who are displaced or refugees who are not coming from Ukraine. How do we make sure that there is a proper balance of efforts? We know that the problem of Afghan refugees, and Jack said it's going to be discussed. I think that's a very important discussion to have, because we know that system is functioning barely, scarcely. And in the work I do here in Manitoba on direct refugee issue through co-chairing the Immigration Council, there's a lot of sort of real sort of deterrence in the system. I may even be more kind of graphic and say constipation in terms of getting people here who've been promised and committed. We have major surges coming out of the Americas. The border issue in the States is not just an American problem, it's a hemispheric problem. You've got major movements in Africa as well. We have to get our heads around that. We have to start thinking, and I just used the example that back in the 80s when I was the immigration minister for 4 years, there was a large coalition internationally of governments and private sector and NGOs who came together to map out a strategy about the resettlement of people, and where there could be resettlement, the reinvestment into the host countries to make sure that they had the economic wherewithal to support the large movements crossing their borders. I don't see yet that kind of initiative. We had the Global Compact on Refugees and Migration 3 years ago, and right now it's not. If you look at the metrics about how it's being applied, they're very low on the scale. So I think that this discussion has opened up a lot of, if I might say, sort of macro questions as much as the direct micro questions. And even there, I mean, it's clear that what we see is that the character and nature of the movement from Ukraine into Poland and into other resettlement areas is also going to have some change in the rules and the practices and the support and the resettlement strategies and programs. So those would be my comments for now. I look forward to learning about the next discussion, but I compliment the organizers and Metropolis and others for bringing together this very interesting set of both evidentiary supply and resources, as well as the very intelligent and thoughtful comments that were made about it. So I wish you all well, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide a benediction to the first panel. Thank you. So, that's it. I'm not hearing anything.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. Sorry about that. I had a slight technical issue. At this point, again, thanks to all the previous speakers and to Agnieszka, and again to my team for pulling this all together. And we were supposed to take a break actually for, I guess, a few minutes before proceeding to the next session. But from what I understand, we are going to proceed immediately to the next session. Is that correct, Chloe or James? Are you out there? If so, I need some direction in that regard. Are we taking a couple of minute break? Because I know, gather there's a transition, but I think we're behind time a bit. So
yeah, if Corinne in panel 2 is ready, we can start right now.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Corinne. Corinne, as always, thank you immensely for all you do, and you won a very prestigious award that I want to mention as an honored civil servant, very rare and extremely well deserved, if I may say so. I'm actually speaking out of turn. I'm not supposed to be speaking now. I'm supposed to. Actually, I don't even have on my agenda. I'm supposed to be introducing you, but if I, but I'm pleased to be able at least to mention, that you won an award recently, which you can tell us about, and I can't think of many people who are so well deserved based on all the tremendous work you've done, not only in immigration, not only for the service providers and the policymaking community and research community, but just in general. So thank you so much for that. And with that said, Corinne Prince is taking the wheel from here on.
Merci beaucoup, Jack. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you fine. I hope everybody else does.
Yes.
Excellent. Merci, Jack, pour la gentille introduction. We won't spend too much time on a recent award I received for partnership, but thank you for your kind words. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Prince. I'm the Director General at the Federal Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And I and my team are responsible for the settlement of over 40,000 Afghan refugees and now also responsible for the settlement and integration of Ukrainian nationals entering Canada. And to date, since January of this year, we have welcomed over 35,000 Ukrainians into Canada, but the appetite now to come to Canada is growing. So far, since March the 17th of this year, we have received over 260,000 applications, and to date, approved 120,000 of those applications. So I'm pleased and honored to have been asked by Jack and ACS to chair today's panel. And today our panel will be exploring the situation on the ground for Ukrainian refugees in both Poland and in Canada. And as we heard this morning, Poland has established several reception centers across the country, and Canada has done the same, with all levels of government and settlement agencies receiving Ukrainians in every province in Canada and providing temporary accommodations, information, and settlement supports, including assistance to find employment and permanent housing. In addition, the private sector has been very generous with a significant donation just recently from Airbnb, from the Ed Shapiro Foundation and Air Canada, as well as from WestJet and many, many others. So the government of Canada began working on Ukraine in January of this year to prepare for the invasion of Ukraine by Russia only a few weeks later. And although we closed the embassy in Kyiv on February 9th and closed our visa application centers in Kyiv and Lviv, we have now reopened our embassy on May the 9th with the visit of our Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. And we continue to deliver immigration services through our global network and have relocated staff, supplies, and equipment to visa offices in Warsaw, Bucharest, and Vienna, and to visa application centers in Warsaw, Bucharest, Belgrade, Sarajevo, and Vienna. With these centers and 2 new Canada Biometric Operations Centers in both Warsaw and Berlin, we now have capacity for 6,600 appointments per day. Finally, on May the 4th, we launched the Canada Information Center in Warsaw. And this provides services in Ukrainian as well as English and French to provide information services to Ukrainian applicants, to socialize the 3 federally announced charters that have already landed in Winnipeg, Montreal, and will be landing in Halifax today, including information now on the 6 weeks of income support and up to 14-day hotel accommodations, on the 10,000 free airline tickets that were provided through the partnership of Miles for Migrants, Air Canada, and the Ed Shapiro Foundation. So that is kind of a quick overview, I think, that assists us as we talk about how both Poland and Canada are managing a number of challenges to address the needs of Ukrainians who many are leaving the Ukraine with only the clothes on their backs. And today's panel is made up of experts on the ground in both countries who are very well placed to share their insights, as well as the successes and continuing challenges that they see. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would allow, let me introduce you to our panel in the order in which we will hear from them. And I would like to start with Poland. I'd like to begin with Magdalena Worno, who is the Commission Coordinator of the Union of Polish Cities. And Magdalena is a sociologist and an expert in the implementation of actions for equal treatment at the local level. And she specializes in international migration and integration. After Magdalena, we will then move to Konrad Pedzwityar, who is the principal investigator and coordinator of the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory. He's also a professor in the Department of International Affairs at the Krakow University of Economics. And he's also a researcher at the Center for Advanced Studies of Population and Religion. After we hear from Konrad, we're going to then hear from Kuba Wigniewski, who's president of the Unit for Social Innovation and Research, Shipyard, Poland. Kuba is a sociologist by training, and in the late 80s, he was deeply involved in numerous initiatives aiming to support civil society in Poland and other countries. In 2003, he was the Yale University World Fellow and has started several NGOs, including Klon Jawar Association, as well as the Forum of Non-Governmental Initiatives. Then we will transition to Canada, but I think no better person to transition with than Olena Bulat, who is with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Olena has been a volunteer with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress National Association as the chair of the Working Group for Ukrainian Displaced Persons and Refugees. She, in this role, coordinates information with the various UCC branches across Canada, identifying best practices as well as challenges. And she has extensive experience in community engagement and policy implementation, and has traveled to the Ukraine many, many times as an election observer, including deployment to Mariupol. Olena is now retired from a career with the provincial and municipal governments and makes her home now in Toronto. And last but not least, we will hear from Chris Friesen. Chris is the Chief Operating Officer of ISS BC, which is one of Canada's largest multicultural immigrant serving agencies. And Chris has been a veteran of Canada's refugee and immigrant settlement sector for over 30 years and is currently co-executive director of CISA-ACSE, which is our national settlement umbrella. And Chris also co-chairs Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven with me and helps coordinate efforts across Canada with over 550 settlement agencies, with federal, provincial, and municipal governments, and of course with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the private sector. So, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have an illustrious panel with us today, and let's get started. I will be keeping time, and because we are running a little bit late, I'm going to ask my panelists to try to keep their comments as close to 5 or 6, 7 minutes at the most, and we'll have then a few minutes for questions at the end. So let's begin with Magdalena. Magdalena, over to you.
Welcome again. I would like to present you some information. Please give me a moment. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. So I would like to present you our report. Ours mean Polish Union of Polish Metropolises. We are we are local government organization associating by 12 large cities, and this report is about number of refugees from Ukraine living in our cities. For first, I would like to tell you about methodology of this report, of this survey. We commissioned an advanced spatial study based on GOT mapping. It helped us better understand where refugees stay in Poland. It also made it possible to find out where the Ukrainians stay in Poland during the day and during the night. And we based it on information from a mobile device. We could learn a lot of people, including where and when they have been, how I said. The idea is the method to study refugee migration lies the fact that the smartphone is one of the key items everyone refugee has on. We use also data from the Polish system of ID number, PESEL, regarding the number of ID issued to refugees from Ukraine who entered Poland after 24 February, have a Ukrainian citizen or are a foreigner's spouse of a Ukrainian citizen, and are not excluded from applying for residence permit on any grounds. And data of the population in this survey, it's people age 15 and above. Of course, we include children. It's mean children age until 40 age. And this number of children we could find in this ID numbers, and we created this report. We used the support of university experts, exactly from the Center of International Migration, to provide a complex formula which relied on the selective. It's this company which give us this data, and of course PESEL database to dictionary. And in this way, we could show how many people from Ukraine are in our cities. And of course, there is a quantitative analyst, and we use some expert consultation from, of course, University of Warsaw, Center for Migration Research, and we organize some workshop how to show this data. And next, that what is the most important, that the influx of refugees from Ukraine has made the population of Poland reach more than 40 million for the first time in our history. And on April, we could observe that we have newcomers, more than 3 million people. It was 3,200,000, but how I said before, now it's more people, about 500,000. And how you see our cities? This is our cities, 12 our cities. This is amount or number of new. Sorry, I'm sorry. I need to back. Okay. And you can see how many people is staying in our cities. That what is the most important, and most of the refugee coming to Poland, staying in our cities, and most of them is in Warsaw, and of course Wrocław, Poznań, and other cities. But very interesting, in my opinion, is that this picture showing what percent has cities population increased. For example, Rzeszów, this is the first city. You can see that now Rzeszów has 53% residents more. So it's mean that every third resident in Rzeszów is from Ukraine. And next, this is a number, exactly number how many people lives from Ukraine lives in our cities, and this is very interesting because this increase of people was very quickly, very fast in the short time, and we weren't, ready for this situation, especially when I think about public services. Yes, and it was really very difficult situation for our cities. And for the beginning, we didn't have any tools to manage this crisis. And we tried to do what we could. And of course, we was talking with our government, but not everything, not every subject was at this moment get some solution. For example, children without adults, without parents, yes, and it was a huge problem to protect them. And of course, there is some regulation helped them to get some new house or be protected by their family, but not parents, yes, but some aunt, I don't know, grandpa, etc. And they are official. They can official decided for what this child can do. They can go to the school or to the doctor, etc. And how I said, we checked that where these people stay during the day and during the night, because it showed us that maybe they stayed, they work or they stay, or they stayed in our cities, to make some staff institution. And then maybe they come back to the closer cities, to the metropolises areas to stay at night. And we noticed that most of them stay in our cities, only expect one metropolitan union but most of them leave our cities. We think that they choose our cities because that as the biggest city, so it's maybe easier to find some support. We suppose that there is some Ukrainian community in the cities who can help them in the first day. And of course, sometimes this decision is very spontaneous because on the border there was someone who proposed them transport and accommodation. So these people decided for this because they didn't know someone in Poland, or they didn't know language, for example. It was really difficult to find for them to find a new situation. And what are the most interesting focus from this report? So how I said, this kind of migration, that because before the war in Poland lived one half Ukrainian. Most of them those were men, and now we have both of women with children, and these women are in different age. Because most of them, this is mother or grandma, and of course children, and most of them lives in our cities, and it's So it's make our cities a very important partner with dialogue with our government, and we of course consult this Polish act about support for citizens from Ukraine coming to Poland after 24 February. But how I said, this this dialogue is very difficult, and for us it's also problematic that we suppose that our services, public services, is not enough, not only for Ukrainian refugees, but also for our citizens, because, how I said, we weren't ready for the situation. We don't have enough staff for serve so many people, and of course we don't have any money, because, for example, when I was talking about children, that it's mean that if our cities is more new 10,000 new children, new pupils, that we should create new school. Yeah, we need new teachers for the schools, and this is also a problem in our not only in our cities, also in Poland. And of course there is some solution, but this is not for long time solution. Yes, because we have make bigger our bigger class, a number of students in our class, pupils in our class, but it's not comfortable to learn and to teach, of course, for everyone. And what I can say more, I try to keep time. Of course, the last slide, there is link to report. This report in English. It is with comments our experts, and so I can tell more that we will repeat this research for I suppose maybe on July, and to check how many people stayed in our cities, and where they moved out, or maybe they will come back. They will come back to Ukraine. Oh, thank you very much. I hope it was clear.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. That was excellent. Really providing some insight into the landings at the municipal level in the cities in Poland. So thank you for that. And we look forward to hearing more from you over time.
Thank you.
I'd like to now move to Conrad. Conrad, over to you, please.
Bonjour, bonsoir. Merci pour me recevoir. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be virtually in Canada and with Flash in Poland. New to me experience. What I want to do within this 5 to 6, 7 minutes that I was given is to just tell you very briefly about the situation pre-war. I think it's important to understand the current situation. You need to have some sort of background knowledge. So I'll give you a bit of news about the situation before, and then a few more additional information on the current situation, and in particular about the key challenges the country is facing. So as far as the pre-war situation, you need to know that Poland has been very sort of rapidly transforming before the war. So up until the beginning of this year, has been transforming from being an emigration country to immigration country. And the last Eurostat reports repeatedly showed that Poland is a country with the highest number of economic migrants, persons who are receiving permissions to enter the labor market, and Polish labor market has been very flexible in receiving these people, and one of the largest groups since 2014 is obviously Ukraine. So the war started for Ukrainians in 2014, and in a way started for Poland as well, because this is the time from when we started to receive increasing number of Ukrainian migrants. At the same time, Poland is a country which receives very few persons applying for international protection. Last year was a very unusual year because there was a significant rise of persons who applied for international protection. So there was a rise from below 3,000 to almost 8,000. But the major reason why there was this rise of applications was the arrival of persons fleeing Belarusia, and also arrival over 1,000 of Afghanis after the closing of the American sort of presence in Afghanistan. So this is the unusual sort of rise of increase of people. At the same time, Poland is a country without a clear migration policy and integration policy. There is hardly any instruments, especially when it comes to integration policy. The form a framework document designed yet at the time when Poland was more an immigration country than immigration country was basically made redundant when the Law and Justice Party came to power in 2016 actually. The document was abolished, and there was information about the new migration and integration policy document, but we've seen two up until now, but two drafts, but no real documents. So you need to know, and it's important from the current perspective, that Poland, that this integration policy elements of it were implemented by local governments, but not by the central government, and there was Poland was not prepared for the influx, in spite of the fact of being a frontier EU frontier country and a country that should envisage this possible influx. There was no collaboration with the other EU countries on, for example, relocation of migrants during the migration crisis 2015, and Poland sort of stubbornly said that it's not, it will not participate in this mechanisms. At the same time, there's been visible securitization and racialization of false migrants, and these processes continue up until today. As one of the previous speakers mentioned about the invisibility of the Polish-Ukrainian border, this is true in a way of allowing so vast number of people to arrive to the country, but at the same time there is a very visible and increasingly visible border between Poland and Belarusia, and the wall is being erected on this border, and there are regular pushbacks and violations of humanitarian and migration law. People are not being allowed to apply for international protection. Poland, what is very important coming to the current situation, has transformed in a way overnight from country receiving mostly economic migrants to a country with one of the largest refugee populations. And as I said earlier, this it hasn't been prepared for this, and if not if there wasn't a very large social movement of help, the situation would be much more difficult than we have, because it took especially central government a significant amount of time to organize itself in a way to receive these people. And the framework, the legal framework also, it took a while to establish, and this framework is not without problems. We can discuss it later, but one of the big issues with this framework is that Ukrainian refugees are not entitled to ongoing financial help, apart from the help which is envisaged within the so-called 500 plus program. So especially those who do not have children are not receiving any financial help, and this help is being provided by UNHCR. So the situation at the moment, as it was mentioned by our the former speaker, is that we do not really know how many Ukrainians are in the country. I can tell you, so the figures that you saw earlier was over 2 million people. And we know that up until yesterday, 1,000,000 and almost 150,000 people applied for a PESEL number, so registered in Poland. So it means that almost 1 million is still missing, and there is a very few people actually at the moment who are queuing up to get this registration. So we do not know, we know from the research we do that significant number of people do not see interest in actually getting this registration. For example, thinking about migrating elsewhere and perceiving the registration in Poland as a possible obstacle in receiving some sort of protection and assistance elsewhere. The UNHCR, which is providing cash, is doing its own registration, but unfortunately, this registration is going is much more slower than the PESEL registration. Up until 20th of May, this is the data I have in front of me. There was slightly over 100,000 people who enrolled for cash assistance in Poland, but as you see the scope for this is much larger. And also it is important to remember that about this very significant number of people who are internally displaced in Ukraine. We see declining sort of dynamics of arrival of Ukrainians to Poland, but at the same time, a very significant number of persons who are internally displaced, much more than over 7 million people, according to UNHCR data, and these people also apply for enrolled for the cash assistance, and the latest data show that over 330,000 Ukrainians internally displaced have enrolled within Ukraine for this protection. As far as the last point, the major issues, they have to do with access to housing, a very significant issue, because housing, the pool of actually council housing is super small, and there are only in Warsaw there's a program where the refugees persons applying for international protections had some privileged access to it, but otherwise they don't. So it is a serious issue, because a significant number of people are massed in former hospitals, in shopping malls, and this kind of places. There's a significant issue with access to healthcare. Poland, you need to know, was one of the countries which was most severely affected by the COVID pandemic. If you look into the data of how many additional deaths there were located. Poland is one of the top countries in the world. And one of the reasons for this is the policy of the state, but at the same time, the inefficiency of the Polish health sector. So this is a serious problem of having additional around 2 million patients within the Polish hospitals. And education is a key issue because only a small percentage of Ukrainian children enrolled to the Polish schools. And if they stay longer, and nothing seems to say otherwise, there will be a significant issue of having this, finding a place and persons to provide access to these people, to the children, Ukrainian children, to Polish schools. Thank you very much for your attention. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Conrad, for that insight into the many challenges in Poland as the country continues to welcome Ukrainian nationals. Interesting that Poland has no clear migration or integration policy. Perhaps there can be something to come out of today's webinar in building a partnership with Canada in that regard. Thank you again. We will now move to Kuba. Kuba, please join us for your presentation.
I will be, okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to be with you. I can start with more or less what you left to think, which is the basically lack of the immigration policy in Poland is a persistent failure. And it was basically, it is the purpose in that, in a sense. June last year, group of NGOs, after 6 years of waiting, they delivered a kind of a white paper on that, but then still now we don't have it. And after or during that kind of a very turbulent situation, it's clear to us that we have to create a new model, or at least, the model of integration. We are looking right now for this kind of a concept, more or less is a social contract. So it's not, decision of politicians, of experts, but basically so many people in Poland are involved in this kind of a situation that it has to be established in a special way, as through probably kind of a national conversation. I mean, you were very kindly presenting me. I'm academic, if you like. I'm an academic, but practitioner very much. Right now we run something which is called Unit for Social Innovation and Research Shipyard, and basically what we do only about I need a very small glimpse of explanation. We have about 40 people doing working in the three main fields: social innovation, research, and the public participation, and everything was run for already 3 months. Everything is shifted toward the kind of a situation respond to that. So we do a lot of micro innovation now. Almost everything is around those issues. To give you example, this is, as people obviously know, war, and some people in the kind of a cruel obviousness of that situation. War is always, in a sense, a source of innovation, obviously on the military field, but also in a way of response. So every Tuesday, 12 o'clock, we have this kind of a experiment of horizontal learning. We are taking small problem piece by piece. We cut it into very small pieces. We're looking for someone who was able to hack that thing to solve that problem, and then promote this kind of open code, if you like, of this innovation. So every week we have a different. Starting with the preschool children. Imagine that you have 450,000 preschool children in your country, just like this. School system, housing, looking for job, information, synchronization of local policies. So every week we are trying to collect, people or organizations who are able to face that thing and provide some kind of interesting solution for that. And in Poland, this is things which were previously perceived as impossible, they simply happened. It has to be clearly stated that there is a certain division of labor in that work. I think the main, I wouldn't say nice surprise, is obviously that it was so massively adopted, in a sense, as a kind of a natural reaction of empathy among people, but regular citizens, not professional NGOs, charity organizations. Obviously, they also play big part of that. local administration, central government, etc., but just, you know, regular folks. And imagine even in countries like Canada that you have 10% of population having other people in their own flats. So, you know, it gives you a kind of a, so the kind of a social norm turn 180 degree upside down during really those 3 months. Normally, Poland was not that much involved in the humanitarian aid, volunteerism, philanthropy. It changed for the certain reasons. And let me tell you, but it's a massive right now. And this is also a challenge because obviously this kind of a humanitarian adrenaline, which was absolutely kind of a volcano in a sense. Imagine that you have 140,000 people on your border per day, that you have, you know, 30,000 in the city, etc. So it really means that you have to react fast. And by its very nature, state was too slow for that. International organization also. So many people basically jumped the car and they ran and that was an incredible amount of effort and still exists. But how long you can, there's a main challenge is the retention of this energy. So, you know, this adrenaline is running low right now. So imagine there's, I think, also in English saying, for sure it's in Polish, that the guest at your home is like a fish. After 3 days, it stinks. And imagine people who have, you know, who basically sharing the bathroom for 90 days, for example. So right now we need this kind of a second gear, if you like, of that thing. And that's the biggest challenge right now, how to go from the phase of reception to the soft immigration to the hard immigration, if you like. We were, you know, hesitating because a lot of people actually right now left back to Ukraine. Is understandable, probably depend on the worst scenario that will be everything between 1.5 million up to, even in the worst scenario, up to 10 million people being in. So that might be very, very different, but it's clear that in every aspect of a kind of everyday life, access to health, education, flats probably will be the biggest thing, because even before the war, Poland has the worst indicator of the number of flats per 100,000 inhabitants. So we were overcrowded already. So now we have to invest, invent a kind of a huge program of, to a modernization and uplifting, if you like, kind of a social squatting on everything, which is kind of a livable environment. Yeah, we are very proud that we don't have stadiums, we don't have camps. Also, we have camps, and that has to be said. Also, I'm very proud of that country, that in terms of the soft power and the reputation, as I saw in the on those research in Canada, we have a kind of a rocket growth. Although it has to be said that the very same that it's kind of limited right now for that kind of a situation, mainly Ukrainians. And this is a subject of my concern and many other people, that somehow Polish heart, if you like, and soul is somehow splitted. It's kind of a kind of a hypocrisy that we were able to accept 3.5 million people from Ukraine, and we are not able to accept 400 million families from Yemen, for example, on the Belarusian border, which is, you have a huge country, but it's for Poland, it's like 200 kilometers, and exactly the same people, not even organization, because basically those are the kind of extremists, if you like, people, the huge groups of NGOs and individuals was basically patrolling Polish border and being tracked by the police because they're not allowed to approach this border as much as, and I don't know whether you are aware of that. And exactly the same people who are basically punished, because that's what it is on the Belarusian border, are perceived as heroes just 100 kilometers below on the south. So we have to work a bit on that. So there's a very complex mosaic of people in our attitude to that. Everything from Vietnamese, 10,000 Belarusian, basically the old Belarusian elite right now is in Poland. And again, there's a question, how you are going to organize their life and their efforts to get back their own country, if you like. So it's a very complex situation, but Ukrainians have the very kind of a special status right now. And this was mentioned in the previous presentation. Imagine that the Rzeszów has increased the population by 35%. So we can imagine what kind of a demand it's create. It's also important that, again, we are far away from Poland. So it's also the part of a conversation in Poland who is doing what. And the government, I'm not very kind of a sympathetic to, especially to that government, I have to admit, although they do three things properly. They very fast, they adapt the law, which basically allows us to open, although only for Ukrainians, the border. So you don't have that thing. So it's a massive flow. They are quite good in mobilizing the international community to get rid of any kind of of illusions vis-a-vis Russia, and they provide military equipment. Those three things they do properly. Otherwise, I think the massive response for that, and I know nothing, almost nothing about Canada, but at least I'm publicly always thinking, let's do it as Canadians. I hear you saying, let's do it like Poles. Anyway, the kind of a basic concept is that you don't want, we have to make a kind of a voluntary, obviously, reallocation of people from big cities because they're overcrowded there. This kind of a sponge model of being in, different smaller territories and being able to accept not 300,000 people in Warsaw, but maybe 30 families in the local parish or something. We are also testing all those kind of elements of the social infrastructure, which normally was somehow, not working, if you like. In Poland, for example, is 11,000 parishes, and we have obviously reputation of being a Catholic country. But even in the first refugee crisis, although the Pope Francis himself, provided an instruction that one parish and one family, it doesn't work completely. It was completely, kind of a forgotten, abandoned, don't tell me even about the thing. Now it's a bit different. But anyway, we need those kind of a point of crystallization, whether it's a local government, business, organization, to provide people with this kind of a sanctuary of help, which means that not the one family, because one of the biggest problem right now, and I know you have this concept of sponsorship, that you cannot do it alone. State doesn't provide help for individuals and people, living in their flats right now. Among my friends, main kind of idea is that you have, anyway, find some money to rent only with your own money, flats for the Ukrainians, so you can basically back to your normal life. It cannot go like that any longer. So we have to invent that thing. You've mentioned that, we also need a kind of a very fast learning from around the world. We put ourselves to stress. Part of that, it has to be said, is that it's obviously you are far from Russians, and we are very close. Mentally, for us, it's not just philanthropy, it's an equal reciprocity, because they basically, Ukrainians, it's a kind of a preventive war. They die for the European values. Yeah, I'm not sure whether Europeans will be ready for that. It's very good that they consolidate their kind of a position, even galvanized, which is against Putin's idea. But basically, especially Poles have a very complicated history. And, we know that Russia, since its beginning, I mean, Moscovians, in fact, not even Russia, since 14th century, they basically do not know any way of existence other than being empire. They has this aggressive chromosome of everything which is repeating: rape, looting, starving people, deporting people, not even cities but nations. And we have a very turbulent history with them. We really have no illusions about where they're going to stop. So for us, it's almost, although it looks like it's just philanthropy, I think for us is the existential thing, not only for us. And yes, and the biggest probably challenge and tragedy is that to stop that war, you have to win that war. I mean, we have in Europe, we have this kind of a recurrence of history. History has not ended. It's going to in a sense, re-emerge. 100 years from the fall of a Weimar Republic, you have more or less the same mechanism right now. And if you don't, and you have like a first and second world in the kind of a sequence of 20 years. I don't know how to make it, but in terms of the kind of a big historical processes, I think I don't know how to make it, but Russians have to somehow rethink themselves, domesticate, if you like, I don't know, after war Germany, which always is the biggest problem for Europe, was too big, too strong Germany, but they somehow rethink themselves. As they happen in Japan, etc., kind of a humiliated, cultivating the resentment Russians will be a kind of a ticking bomb for Europe. I don't know how to make it right now massively. Obviously, everyone is against Russia. Although it has to be mentioned, there is a very small portion of people who are not saluting Putin, and I don't know how to reach them. And every kind of support from countries like Poland means kiss of death for them. But we have to be aware that the courage in Russia is extremely it costs a lot. You can have a 15 years of jail for not basically, not being in this. But it's also the lesson of lobotomy of the brain on a massive scale. So I think in Poland right now we have a lot of right now thinking how to retain that energy, which is a very new thing for us. It's a Churchillian moment, if you like. We know it won't be easier. The big problem right now, everything, is how to keep that kind of a conversation and kind of an understanding that to give example, today the price of the gasoline hit 8 zloty per liter. Anyway, it sounds for you not like it will be doubled probably. So how long Poles will accept for the long run that basically buying a diesel for 10 zloty, it's still better than having Russians in your backyard. So it's very much about the persistence. It's very much about long type of the operation. I can talk for hours about it because that's my kind of my life, but I know already probably crossed the line of accepted time frame. So I will shut up right now, and if you have any questions to me, I will be very happy to answer.
Kuba, thank you so much for your honest assessment, for openly sharing and putting us into the shoes of a Polish citizen. It's complex, it's not easy. And, Mr. Axworthy challenged us all to think more creatively about helping all of the displaced refugees around the world. As you spoke about Poland, I couldn't help but think that the narrative in Canada is very similar. We hear from families that want to bring their family members to Canada as refugees. Why did Canada commit to 40,000 Afghans? Why have we got almost 40,000 Ukrainians in Canada? And what about the other refugee source countries? So this continues to be a narrative in Canada as well. But listen, thank you so much. Because we're short on time, I'm now going to move to Olena Bulat. Olena, please, I've framed you as being the bridge between Poland and Canada. I welcome you to share your perspectives, Olena.
Okay, well, I'll refrain from engaging in any diatribes, but I do enjoy doing that. So I'll just stick to the topic at hand, which is the response of the Ukrainian Canadian community to the settlement, resettlement of Ukrainians. And UCC is the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, is really the voice of Ukrainian Canadians in Canada. We have about 17 branches represented in really every province of Canada. Most of you will know that there's a large Ukrainian Canadian population. It's 1.4 million or so. So when this unfortunate war hit, it, in a sense, it's tragic, but it did serve to revitalize the Ukrainian community. And it's an organized community under any circumstances, I would say, but this really redoubled its efforts. So I think the mobilization of the community was quick. In my mind, it was impressive. It was a way that I personally challenged or channeled my my anger towards all of this. And I know that feeling was shared with many other volunteers. It was a way to just to deal with a situation that is so untenable in so many ways, ones that many of our parents had lived through one way or another. So it also became important to manage our expectations as a community in all of this, because we of course wanted things to happen quickly to the best of our ability, to deal with the war from a humanitarian aspect, and also in terms of resettlement. So as part of mobilizing the community, we turned towards government, obviously, for support. And we have been receiving it over a number of months now. And I mean, I can spend some time criticizing or assessing what it's been, but overall, it's been an organic process. It's gaining some formalities to it now. And I think everybody was just struck with the fact that, I mean, the nature of the war is changing. Perhaps there was a feeling that things would end quickly. And in fact, people that would be coming to Canada would be returning. But, you know, those realities are always in a state of flux. So I don't want to fault, you know, the government with its initial thinking about what type of response it should offer with that. That being said, it was an ambitious invitation to allow, at this point anyhow, an unlimited number of Ukrainians to come in on a temporary visa. So since that time, I have to say that the community's had all sorts of opportunities to become part of various processes that are in place to try to take advantage of what's being offered. And this is in conjunction with all the grassroots support that's already been pouring forward. So the challenge has been to deal with these changing realities, to be able to benchmark and say, okay, are we moving in the right direction? What's everybody doing? Again, looking at best practices, both internationally and here nationally, to see how we can help one another in order not to replicate what others are doing. And I mean, it's challenging because Canada is a large country. We have a federal system of government, which means that decision-making varies. Different levels of government or orders of government are responsible for different things. And so part of it has also been understanding who should be pushed to offer what, or who would be willing to do what. So that's been, you know, a big part of all of this too. We've also had to review and remind ourselves of who our client group is with these Ukrainians coming. There's certain myths and then there's certain realities. And that's why it's helpful to have information on an ongoing basis about who's here and who's coming and who may come, flawed as it may be, because decisions are being made on that basis. And there is a lot of anecdotal information out there, and some of it is more valid than others. I can give examples, but there's no time. So one of the things that has been important, and it continues to be challenging, is to have a robust, kind of comprehensive and yet nimble welcome program for incoming refugees or displaced persons. And you know, this is a work in progress. It really has depended to a certain extent on each of the provinces. And what can I say? We're still working on it, but it's important because if you don't set the scene right away, if you don't allow people to come in, decompress, get the lay of the land, understand what services they're eligible for, then it serves as a hindrance later on if they haven't had that opportunity. And so, although our federal government has, for instance, some time ago announced the fact that there would be hotel stays available for a 2-week period for incoming Ukrainians under the QIT visa program, that hasn't materialized, and that has led to a number of problems in terms of not being able to find temporary accommodation. So another challenge has been, yes, to be able to take full advantage of what's being offered and to work on perhaps increasing that support and making it compatible with other types of support. I'm talking about income support, the fact that Ukrainians have received an open work permit, but there are nuances behind the scenes that complicate the quick sort of deployment of all of this. There are also challenges in having different provinces react, although at this point I'd say that that's more or less sorted out on the kinds of services that they would be willing or could offer around schooling and medical coverage, and so on and so forth. But I mean, things are moving quickly, and they are being resolved in a number of these fronts. Not wanting to sound too optimistic, one of the key challenges also has been the regional kind of aspect of all of this, and others have mentioned this. The same, I guess, applies to what has been going on in Poland. We really don't have any mechanisms in place to encourage migration of Ukrainians to other centers in Canada. Now, some provinces have taken it upon themselves to go out and more actively recruit Ukrainians in Poland, and others haven't. So anyhow, a lot of Ukrainians are ending up in Ontario, and they're landing in Southern Ontario in Toronto. And that is proving to be difficult in terms of being able to provide these people, as I had mentioned earlier, with a comprehensive welcome and a place to stay, even on a temporary basis. So we need to continue working to see how we can deal with this issue. And in order to do that, we need to work interprovincially and work not just between different orders of government, but also with the help of the community. What else can I say? Maybe I'd like to mention, as everyone else has, that housing is the biggest issue here. Hosting in the home, which has been thrown forward as a panacea for housing Ukrainians, is not the answer. And if people think that they're interested in hosting in the home, in no way then means that they actually will host in the home. So out of the thousands of people that have put their names forward as being interested in providing this form of what still is temporary housing, I think at the end of the day, a very small number actually move ahead. And in terms of community hosting, sort of along the lines of what private sponsorship offered for refugees, but not available to this group that isn't considered to be refugees. I mean, I know that we're exploring community hosting again on a more informal basis, but this really is the biggest problem in all of this. And whether more substantial income support is the answer, well, I don't really know what the answer is. We're all grappling with this, but I think we do need to think outside the box. And it does raise that question again of what shared responsibility really means in and around housing, because we can't keep on falling back on the same solutions because they're simply not there. So that would be what I have to say right now. Thank you.
Elena, thank you very much for providing those insights from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress perspective. Months ago in Toronto, and I can say it has been a journey for all of us, Elena. I do want to say that the work of the Congress has been a great help to all of us. And as Elena described, many of the challenges that Canada is experiencing have come from the fact that we are offering a visitor visa to Ukrainian nationals. And visitors who come to Canada normally don't get a lot of services. So my team and I have tried to, make myriad of changes to our settlement program, to amend it so that we can provide those settlement services to the Ukrainians. Provinces and territories have had to amend their legislation and their programs to provide eligibility for this very unique class. And so a lot of this goes back to the type of pathway that was chosen to very quickly get Ukrainians into Canada and to allow them to come and go over a 10-year period, hoping that it would provide maximum flexibility. So it is very flexible, but it does not bring with it all of the services and supports that a refugee pathway does. So you're very right in that. And as Olena also said, timely information is so important. And so we and the settlement agencies and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress quickly came together to create this Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven Governance Committee. And this is a really good segue to our final panelist today, to Chris Friesen, as Chris and I co-chair that committee. And so Kuba, you'll be happy to hear that several federal departments, all of the provinces and territories, as well as 550 settlement agencies and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress meet every single week, every Tuesday morning for almost 2 hours to talk about the issues, to announce new programs, and to have that two-way information sharing that Olena has described as is so critical. So with that segue, I would love to introduce you once again to Chris Friesen, my colleague and partner. Chris, so we look forward to hearing what insights you have.
Thank you, Corinne. Yeah, these are definitely uncharted territories, unprecedented, and the challenges are significant. I think that we're comfortable here. I mean, I'm joining you today from Vancouver, Canada, about 8,200 kilometers away from Warsaw. The intensity of what you're experiencing in Poland is very different here in Canada. Yes, we have decades of systems and a well-established immigrant integration, refugee integration policy framework that goes back to the 1970s, of which we are building upon now for this movement. As Corinne has alluded to, the fact that Ukrainians are coming in as temporary residents has posed unique challenges as we build a refugee-like support system and processes behind the scenes because of the fact that they're arriving as visitors. Some of the things that we've been working on here, going back to March, the establishment of a national secretariat, Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven, as Corinne has mentioned. This national secretariat comes together on a weekly basis, bringing over 100 people across Canada, representatives from each of the provincial territorial governments, provincial and territorial service coordination tables, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, employment councils, our Francophone organizations, 5 federal departments. So we have a system in place where we can raise issues and attempt to address them. We also have a designated national website called ukrainiansafehaven.ca. This national website is attempting to coordinate an all of Canada approach to supporting displaced Ukrainians, arriving now at 400 to 500 a month, a day. This website really highlights the work of each of the provinces and territories, the coordinating tables, first language, Ukrainian, Russian, English, and French information for Ukrainians that are going to be settling in different parts of the country, as well as a corporate donor portal to bring together the private sector in helping to support this movement. In addition to that, there is an employer portal where we're working in a coordinated fashion with another federal department on the engaging employers around job vacancies, employment attachment offers, etc. So a number of systems are being elevated, fine-tuned, enhanced as it pertains to our regular immigration and refugee programming. We have been fortunate with the government of Canada that because of the temporary resident nature of Ukrainians, that the over 550 immigrant serving NGOs across Canada can provide English language training program, employment assistance services, first language support services to augment the tremendous work that volunteers are doing as part of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. We've also had recent miracles related to expansion of the settlement, the national settlement programming that offers various supports to immigrants new to Canada as it pertains to housing supports and being able to hire more NGO staff to work with Ukrainians to find that elusive permanent housing challenges that we've also heard from our colleagues in Poland. I think the biggest challenge we face, has to do with the legal status and the fact that this program, although the government of Canada quickly pivoted to provide entry to this country, it has posed significant challenges. The community supports the local governments across Canada, again, nowhere near what you're dealing with in Poland. But to have, 260,000 people and no target, no intended destination, no time frame in arrival, this has created significant concerns for communities and service providers across the country. From the perspective is that we want to provide the most possible welcome to displaced Ukrainians, but understand that we're dealing with infrastructure challenges, affordable housing shortages that cannot be easily addressed through increased funding sources. We have the National Secretary launched in the last 2 weeks a notification of arrival transmission, 27 questions in 4 languages to try and get a better gauge on how these visitors what is their background, what's their intended work occupation, how many children are coming to help us better prepare for that welcome. And we are continuing, not from the National Secretariat perspective, but from CISA-ACSE, the NGO national umbrella, to advocate on systems to ensure that displaced Ukrainians have access to certain federal benefits that would assist them in securing employment, like that which is offered to refugee populations. We have been advocating for conversion of the temporary resident legal status to permanent residence. We have been advocating for higher levels of income support for those Ukrainians in low income. And we have been advocating for a cap in the program, not with any specific number, but to keep it open-ended, given the challenges that we face, far, far different than what you're dealing with in Poland. It is a concern of keeping an open-ended visitor visa program in place as the numbers now approach quickly 300,000. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that overview. Very comprehensive, but I want to actually publicly thank you for your leadership over the past 3 or 4 months. I know how much you personally have committed to this initiative, and your 30 years of experience has been a huge help. So thank you so much for your continued persistence and partnership as we continue to try to provide Ukrainians the safest haven possible. So participants, we have heard now from 5 experts from both Poland and Canada on the situation on the ground in those 2 countries. And I'd like to now open it up for questions. We hopefully have at least 5 minutes, but I know Chloe or Jack will tell me if I'm wrong. So I can't on my phone actually see everything or see you put up your hand. So I'm going to have Chloe help me maneuver some of the questions or the hands that are going up. Chloe, do we have some questions from the floor?
Hi, Corinne. Yes, we do. So I can also invite the other panelists to check the Q&A section and pick the question they would like to answer. Maybe we can start like this, if you would like to.
I can talk about initiatives related to survivors of war. There is a collaboration that brings together specialized organizations and the survivors of torture here in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. They're awaiting official funding decision by the Government of Canada in launching a national remote survivors of war clinical treatment program that would also include training webinars for teachers, daycare staff, high school counselors, etc., to ensure that those children and youth entering the Canadian public system have and the staff that are supporting their integration in our school system have the necessary knowledge and ability to appropriately respond to individuals that are recently migrated to the country as survivors of war.
Thanks, Chris. Chloe, do you have some other questions?
So let me check.
It's Miriam here. I believe that some of our panelists have lit up their cameras. I wonder if they had wanted to weigh in.
I can pick up 1 or 2 questions. One of them concerns the protection of migrants from human trafficking situations, especially with private placement situations. It is a very good question. In the case of Poland, this emerged very quickly as a big issue. You can imagine, as I mentioned, and also Cuba, in the first 2-3 weeks, the dynamics of influx was absolutely overwhelming. And in this kind of situation, what I didn't have time to tell you was that above all, the civil society and also the local governments that were basically better suited and also implemented some elements of integration policies were first to, assist, and they were also first to encounter the situations of possible human trafficking. And as I was informed, just a few days ago when I was having a meeting with members of the City Hall and representatives of the civil society. They told me about the situation, and they said that very quickly they established links with police and through the police with Interpol, and they were trying to monitor the situation and trying to prevent this kind of situations. But obviously, if you have so large influx of persons at once, it is inevitable in a way to totally exclude this kind of situation. So they may have happened, and there was a quick reaction from the police. And also at the very first weeks, as you know, there was a very large influx of international students from Ukraine. Ukraine we see as a country of emigration, but you need to understand and remember that Ukraine is also a country of immigration. Over 500,000 people registered with legally residing in Ukraine before the war. 1.5 million internally displaced persons. We have to remember about them, twice refugees in a way, but also over 80,000 international students, among whom Indian students were the largest groups, and also one of the first internationals to be killed in the war, Indian students in Kharkiv. So when they were arriving to Poland, there was some tensions at the border, instigated most probably by some troll factories in a way, and some right-wing persons were in a way, some persons were in Rzeszów, as far as I remember, Przemyśl, tried to attack these persons, and also police and enforcements were sent there and quite quickly reacted. So just to briefly say something on this. And there's also a question about the weapons sending to Poland and how this is going, and talking about victory in the war, and that this will hurt Ukrainians, and what Poland is doing to do this. Well, actually, as you know, and Kuba, I think, quite vividly mentioned this, Polish society, and there's several studies, but one of the interesting studies is a Puri study from last year, which showed that large number of nations around the world, while people worry in Canada, in other places about climate change, Poland was a striking example of country yet last year that was very much worrying not about the climate change, but about Russia. And in this case, it was a unique country in a way on the world map that was worrying and perceiving Russia as a perspective threat to its existence. So in a way, this, unfortunately, these beliefs were very well grounded, as we can see at the moment. And basically, Mr. Putin, as we've seen towards weeks leading to the war and after, has been totally silent to any type of diplomatic talk. The only words he understands are the words of military force, and unfortunately, this is the only language he understands. So I'm afraid talking peace with Putin has very little sense. If the stronger the international community, the stronger language it uses, and also action it does in bringing this conflict to the end with, unfortunately, military tools, there won't be the end of it, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for your time and for these questions.
There's
Merci, Conrad. Go ahead, Chris.
The government of Canada's chartered flights, the last one that is currently organized lands today in Halifax. Thereafter, At this time, no further Government of Canada organized charter, but we are now moving towards engagement of the corporate sector and Canadians in offering free flights from Eastern Europe to Canada. And that program is kickstarting in probably about a week. Also, the question related to refugee claim in Canada. Be mindful that Canada currently, the legislation and our framework and why Ukrainians are coming as temporary residents. One reason why is that because Ukrainians are able to seek a safety in adjoining countries in Europe, because the European Union and host states are offering support, housing, access to work, et cetera, they are not considered refugees under the Canadian law, and so and hence arriving as temporary residents under the visitor visa program to expedite their arrival in this country versus our permanent resident program, which takes months, if not years, in the case of refugees. So those individuals wanting to make a claim, asylum claim in Canada, I am not a lawyer. My recommendation is that they utilize Canada's offer and apply for under the Canada-Ukrainian authorization, emergency travel authorization visa. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Just to add one more announcement for today, the income support that was promised by our Prime Minister goes live today. So it will, the website is available, and all Ukrainians who have come in on a SUAT visa are eligible to apply for that income support. Chloe, I'm sure there are many more comments and questions in the chat, but given the time, I will close our panel. Nous espérons que vous avez appris beaucoup aujourd'hui en termes des défis et aussi des succès jusqu'à date au Canada et en Pologne. I don't think that anybody can predict when the Russian aggression will end. So we can continue to learn from each other as both Poland and Canada continue to provide a safe haven for Ukrainian nationals. Yeah. J'aimerais remercier nos panélistes, Magdalena, Conrad, Kuba, Olena, and Chris for their insights today. Thank you so much, Jack, for the opportunity. Over to you.
Hi, Corinne, it's Miriam here. I'll be closing things up on behalf of ACS. Thank you for a masterful chairing of, and thank you so much to the panelists in the second panel. I must say I'm very moved and blown away by the level of today's discussion. I feel like this exchange was extremely fruitful, and it has given me a taste for more such opportunities for collaboration. The first panel, I was amazed by the level of information and the sophistication of the kind of data that researchers were able to go and get, and the understanding it gave us of what's going on. And in the second panel, I am very grateful for the window that panelists gave us into the reality on the ground in Poland, both the extreme complexity and challenges involved in dealing with the massive arrival and without the proper infrastructures, but also the ingenuity and devotion of the people who've been putting their minds and time to trying to find solutions, and the ethical problems that have risen as a result. So lots of food for thought. Thank you again, all of you, for taking the time to speak with us and share your expertise with us, despite all of the claims that you have on your time. And on behalf of the Association for Canadian Studies, Metropolis Institute, and our director, Jack Jedwab, I'd just like to say merci beaucoup à tout le monde, dziękujemy, dziękuję, and there's a possibility that we will be organizing a delegation of service providing organizations to Poland at some time in the autumn. So we hope very much in the interim that we will keep in touch. Please share ongoing research with us if you can, and maybe we will be able to meet in person. Thanks again, merci, dziękuję, until we meet again. Bye-bye.